Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to docket number 171046 REO4, application of the Connecticut Light and Power Company doing business as Eversource Energy to amend its rate schedule as AMI cost recovery. So on February 6, 2026, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority determined that recent circumstances provide cause for the authority to examine whether to rescind, reverse, or alter the December 4th, 2024 decision. The authority announced that it would hold a hearing in accordance with General Statute Section 16.9, and that is what we are here today for. As a reminder, there is a court reporter here today who will transcribe the record in this proceeding, and therefore we look to the court reporter for the official record. For that reason, please refrain from using the chat function in the Zoom, as that will not be part of the official record. And I also ask when the first time anyone speaks, please use a loud, clear voice and state your name and affiliation for the record, particularly if the name on your Zoom does not correspond with who you are. So before we begin, I will take appearances from any attorneys representing an admitted party or intervener. If you'd like to make an appearance and participate in the hearing, I ask you please locate the raise hand function under the reactions tab, and I will call on you as I see him pop up. Attorney Minikowski.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Andrew Minikowski for the Office of Consumer Counsel. I'm joined by my co-counsel, Attorney Prabhisha Bandari, as well as Consumer Counsel Claire Coleman.
Thank you. Attorney Pace.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Vincent Pace for the Connecticut Light and Power Company, doing business as Eversource Energy.
Thank you. Attorney Nigro.
Good morning or good afternoon. Susanna Nigro from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
Okay. I think we've taken care of that. Thank you very much.
I'm so sorry. I cannot find the raise hand function.
Oh, Attorney
Amanda Trinzi on behalf of the Connecticut Industrial Energy Consumers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for catching. All right. Is that it? Okay. Are there any administrative matters this afternoon before we get going? And if there are, just use the raise hands function. Oh. All right, seeing none. We'll move on to brief public comment. Would anyone like to provide public comment? Okay. Introduction of witnesses. Attorney Pace, would you like to introduce your witnesses and let me know if anyone needs swearing in?
Thank you very much. We're producing the following four witnesses. Jared Lawrence, who's our Senior Vice President of Customer Operations and Digital Strategy, and he's also our Chief Customer Officer. Sean Noonan, Vice President of PMO and Next Gen Delivery. Doug Horton, Senior Vice President of Regulatory and Strategic Financial Planning, and Jennifer Schilling, Vice President of Grid Modernization. And Vice Chairman, in the excess of caution, we'd like to have each of the witnesses take the oath just to confirm they've been sworn for the record for today's hearing. Thank you.
Sure. All right. It's the first time I've ever done this on a Zoom. So I guess if everyone could pop on camera and raise their right hand and come off mute. There we go. Okay. Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you shall give concerning this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God, or upon penalty of perjury?
I do.
All right, cool. Thank you. Okay, so we'll turn it over to Attorney Pace and the company. I understand you have a presentation. I assume Mr. Horton is leading the presentation. So Mr. Horton, just a quick question. I think commissioners, I took a look at the presentation earlier too. I think we may pop in, do you mind if we have questions through the presentation? If we kind of not interject, but kind of ask as you're going through it. And I know I have some questions at the end for the company. I also have questions for Deep after the company presents, if they don't mind. But Mr. Horn, you're okay with kind of commissioners popping in through the presentation?
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
of course.
Okay, great. So I expect that to happen. I will shut up now and turn it over to Attorney Pace and the company.
Thank you. If we could please have Ms. Lupoli please share the screen to show the presentation. And just for the record, this was filed in the docket today. I would like to have Mr. Lawrence just adopt this as a piece of evidence in the record because this is a contested case proceeding and because he's subject to questions on that. So if I could please have Mr. Lawrence please respond to the following questions. Did you sponsor a presentation dated February 18th, 2026?
Yes, I did.
And do you have any modifications to that presentation?
No, I do not.
And do you adopt that as your sworn testimony under oath?
I do.
Okay, and thank you to Ms. Lupoli for showing the presentation. I'm just going to very briefly start and turn it over to my witnesses. On behalf of the company, I want to thank all of you for convening today's proceeding to give us an opportunity to answer your questions. They're very important to us, and to walk through some points we'd like the commissioners and the authority staff and the parties to consider in connection with this very important initiative, which is trying to launch the AMI program in Connecticut. If you could proceed to the next slide. We plan to focus on 3 topics. A very brief overview, just to set the table to make sure we're all grounded in the key facts. And then, most importantly, 3 obstacles for AMI deployment and what's holding up the process. We're also coming here finally with solutions. We'd like to propose for your consideration some solutions and next steps that we think will benefit our customers, and so we can move forward expeditiously and also cooperatively. And with that, if we move to our next slide, I'll let Mr. Lawrence take it from here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the commissioners for the opportunity to come before you today. So as a leader of the organization that's responsible for our AMI deployments at Eversource, I'd first like to convey our excitement about the new capabilities that we're already delivering to customers in Massachusetts, but more importantly, how eager we are to bring our expertise and growing track record of success to Connecticut so that our CLMP customers can enjoy the same benefits. So we recognize that this is a major investment, which is why we are laser focused on delivering the highest value for the best cost. An AMI implementation involves complex systems integrations, carefully staged field deployments, and thoughtful outreach to customers. And happily, we're already demonstrating in Massachusetts that we're up to the challenge. We just need a predictable regulatory framework to bring that success to Connecticut. So if you move to the next slide, I'd just like to spend a few minutes talking about the value proposition. And again, commissioners, please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have any questions about anything I cover. So let's discuss the customer value proposition in a little bit more detail. First, we have the enhanced experiences that customers will recognize directly and associate that with AMI. Things like more access to usage data, customized usage alerts, new time of use rate options, and customized insights into how they can save money. Then there are the benefits that they will experience as a result of AMI, even though they might not really realize that AMI is making it possible. For example, easier adoption of EVs and distributed energy resources and programs that will accelerate distributed energy resource deployment. And of course, there are the wide distribution system benefits that customers will experience more so as greater reliability and a more cost-efficient grid. Finally, I want to note that our AMI 2.0 technology can accommodate future applications in its distributed intelligence environment, meaning that the AMI use cases we talk about today will likely expand to cover new use cases with new innovations over time. Any questions here before I move ahead to the next slide?
Yeah, I guess I'll have a question on this. So can AMI increase grid utilization in terms of kind of getting more out of the grid that we already have or customers already paid for?
Absolutely, and my colleague Ms. Schilling can speak more to that. But for example, the volt-var optimization as well as the conservation voltage reduction features are specifically designed to do that, to allow us to operate the grid more efficiently without having to build in as much of a factor of safety. Ms. Schilling, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would say that, by providing visibility to the grid edge, it gives us the ability to better manage, as Mr. Lawrence said, voltage and reactive power, which cuts down on line losses and basically makes power flow more efficient. So we're getting more out of the grid that way. I would also say it does open the door for, more customer participation in things like a time varying rate or a way to reduce peak and flatten load shapes, and all of those, anything we're doing to flatten load shapes and reduce the peakiness of the grid increases utilization. So without AMI, it becomes very difficult to manage the peakiness and the load factor of the grid. So those are some examples.
How does an AMI meter communicate? Like, this is my navigator, like Wi-Fi capability? Like, how does the communication work with the customer and like even with the company?
Commissioner Arconte, that's actually an excellent transition to the next slide if you'd like me to move ahead, because I'm about to talk through the communications data flow if you're good for me to move forward.
Commissioner,
I think Commissioner Cheeseman wants to pop in.
Okay.
Yep.
sorry, quickly before we move to the next slide. So you mentioned the rollout in Massachusetts. And if you're going to cover this in the later part of the presentation, you don't have to answer this now. My question to you is, what is your penetration in Massachusetts? When was it at a point where you felt you could effectively evaluate results, or is it still too early to say if Massachusetts customers have embraced the virtues stroke benefits you purport, you say AMI purports to deliver? And I realize that's a rather long-winded question, but.
That's an excellent question. Thank you. So we have approximately 140,000, I believe, customers in our Western Massachusetts territory that have received their AMI meters and are interacting with, a fraction of those are interacting with the technology at the individual customer level basis. That is out of a total installation of about 1.5 million meters. So we're just shy of 10% deployed. So unfortunately, it is too early to assess the overall effectiveness of our projections in terms of the benefits. And that deployment started, the first customers started receiving their meters in July of 2025. So the vast majority of customers are just in the first few months of experiencing their AMI meters. So we will certainly be expanding on the benefits and the observations when we file our AMI plan in a few months.
All right, thank you.
So
Thank you. Yep, go ahead.
If I could follow up on these last two questions. First, Commissioner Cheeseman's question: when you say customers, are you talking about residential or also commercial, industrial? And can you give us a sense of that profile?
Yes, it's all of our customers. We essentially deploy the meters in a footprint because it is a mesh-based technology. So the mesh grows in strength by kind of coalescing around the first core meters and building out from there. And we will cover all residential, commercial, and industrial meters that are in scope in that footprint. And by in scope, our largest customers with the largest, most specialized meters, many of which already have time varying technologies and other interval technologies might not be in scope. But yeah, it's pretty much across the board. Unfortunately, I do not know exactly off the top of my head the breakdown between residential, commercial, and industrial.
All right, thank you. And then going back to Vice Chairman Arconte's question. So you're suggesting that one of the values of AMI is voltage control, more efficient operation of the grid itself. Are there alternative technologies that can also accomplish that objective?
Jen, I'll defer to you.
I can jump in if that's helpful. So for something like voltage management, we can do kind of a more I would say a less sensitive version. So we have grid devices that manage voltage and reactive power. So think like a voltage regulator, cap bank, things hanging on poles. And those work, and we can use line sensors to kind of say, okay, let's give me some sense of what is going on with voltage. But the benefit of AMI is now I have voltage measurements at every point from the feeder head to the end of the line. So now I can be a lot more surgical and say, hey, in this area, I'm experiencing inefficiency, and I can put a device right there. So we can do it. What we've said is the benefit with AMI is almost close to double in terms of if you think about the benefit of reducing line losses. With AMI, with that increased visibility, I can take those assets and can make them more useful, and that's kind of how we drive the incremental benefit of AMI. We can do it without it, but it's just much more effective when I can see what's going on along the grid.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well then, if no further questions on this slide, we can move ahead to the slide that is directly responsive to Vice Chairman Arconti's question here regarding how AMI works. And so essentially what we're going to do is we're going to start from right to and move toward the left. And this slide basically depicts the data flow. So it all starts with the meters, which create the usage data as well as event flags. Those data are transmitted by the communications mesh I described a little bit earlier, by the clusters of meters, and then collected by access points in that communications network, which are then backhauled by the cellular network to the head-end system. So then the head-end system, it assembles the data and sends it to the meter. It assembles the data from all of those access points and sends it to the meter data management system, where the data are first validated, and then any alarms associated with those data are processed. The MDMS then sends the data for billing to the customer information system, and event flags such as outage flags to the OMS system.
Did Mr. Lawrence freeze, or is it just my computer?
I think he did freeze. If we could just have your indulgence just to give him a few moments to see if the technology will allow him to rejoin the call. Thank you for your patience.
Both ways.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Lawrence, we lost you around heat end and caught you back at flows both ways.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Let's see. Yeah. So I'll note that the data flows. I'm sorry, you said you lost me at flows both ways, or I came back when?
We lost you at heat end and came back at flows both ways. So step 4.
On step 4.
Oh, step 4. Okay, at the head end. Okay.
Oh,
so the head end system. Yeah, head end system. Okay, so the head end system assembles the data and sends it to the meter data management system, where the data are then validated, and any alarms that are detected from the data are processed. The MDMS then sends the data for billing to the customer information system, and then outage flags to the OMS, the outage management system, which then generates outage notifications and outage tickets. And then there are other systems such as the enterprise data platform, which receive data from the data management system, and also which then serves as a repository for our customer engagement web portal and other analytics use cases. Finally, I will note that the data flow both ways. So our back office can send outbound signals to meters to attain the real-time status of a meter, as well as ad hoc reads. And they can also send remote connect and disconnect commands to those meters as well.
So how, Connecticut, so I have a quick question on this one. Connecticut and your service territory in particular has some really rural areas. I'll just use my home as an example. It's set back really far from the road. For context, I have like about 5 or 6 utility poles that go from the road down my driveway. So as soon as you turn into my driveway, your phone, like everything goes into SOS mode until you get into the house and are connected to Wi-Fi. So how would there be trouble in meter communication in areas like the one I described, or even more rural areas of the state?
Great question. Thank you for that question. So there are, first of all, what I'll first start with is that with our AMI technology vendor, we have essentially a no meter left behind provision in the contract, meaning that the vendor has to come up with a communication solution for every meter that is installed on the system. And in your case, that might involve, it would most likely involve our working with the communications vendor to install repeaters from your meter up your street until it gets to the point where it can reliably connect with the cellular service. We are exploring a couple of instances that we're encountering right now in Western Massachusetts that might actually require satellite connectivity because they are so remote, and that might prove to be the most cost-effective solution. But again, we have our No Meter Left Behind agreement with our vendor, which will ensure that even somebody like you with a long driveway in a would be taken care of.
Thanks.
And is my audio okay now?
All right, could I just ask a question? And for some reason, my Zoom does not have a raise hand function, so I don't know about that. But so with the wireless, does the wireless go down? And if it went down, what would happen?
Oh, another excellent question. I'm glad you brought that up. So we actually are the first utility to work with our in the industry to work with our communications vendor on a multi-carrier SIM device for our access points. So we are not dependent on simple cellular carriers. What our access points will do is at any given time they will find the most efficient and the strong path to get the data back called. But if there is a network failure for, say, one of the major cellular carriers, it will immediately look for another option with another carrier. You will recall that there was an event a few weeks ago where one of the major carriers had a major disruption. We saw almost no degradation in performance on our system because of that multi-SIM carrier capability. We assume it was because of the multi-SIM carrier capability.
You must get quite a cell bill every month. Is there a way to communicate over the power lines themselves from a technology standpoint?
That's an excellent question. I don't know if anybody else on the Eversource panel would like to answer that. I know that long ago in my career, we looked at those options, but they proved to be much less efficient for the kind of the overall solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions on the system components? So if we move ahead to the next slide, then we're going to kind of dig down into the benefits. So the benefits are wide ranging, but what I want to frame up the next few slides of the discussion by grouping them into three categories. So first, we have the benefits that customers experience and will easily recognize as the AMI features. Then we have operational benefits that customers will experience as more efficient and reliable service and lower costs. And then there are the societal benefits, such as peak load reduction and the acceleration of technologies that will help achieve Connecticut's carbon reduction goals and possibly other electrification goals. So let's get a little bit more specific about the customer benefits and switch to the next slide here. So on the left there, we list out some of the improved customer experience elements. Customers will experience much improved outage and storm response enabled by AMI, which will include proactive notifications, quicker restoration times, and more accurate estimated times of restoration. There will also be fewer needs to visit a customer's home since, first of all, the AMI technology can support net metering, so there'll be fewer needs to add second meters for solar customers. We'll be able to ping a meter for service status remotely rather than having to send a tech for all investigations. And we can also turn customers on remotely 24/7 with the new technology. And we can also proactively detect if customers are experiencing voltage fluctuation or other service conditions that might need to be investigated. So then moving to the other side of the slide here, there are the benefits associated with increased access to customer data, which they will be able to enjoy via the new customer engagement web portal. That will include allowing customers to view their usage data near real time and share their data with the third parties of their choice. Customers will be able to customize communications such as high bill alerts that will allow them to take the guesswork or the surprise out of their monthly household budgets associated with their utility bills, and also give them time earlier in the month to adjust their behavior to try and bring that bill down. And then customers will also receive analytics-based reports that will include personalized bill disaggregation insights, which is essentially the capability to look at the overall consumption patterns and deduce through analytical techniques what are the biggest drivers of consumption in that home, so we can send customized tips to those customers to save. And then on the energy management front, we've talked about this a good bit, but I'll just reiterate it again here. Interval usage data will allow the company not only to manage the grid more effectively, but it will allow us to offer demand response and other time differentiated rate options, which will allow customers to monetize their flexible behaviors as well as any distributed energy resource investments that they make. Any questions on the customer benefits?
Yes. Okay. So you said you could implement remote connection. So I assume that you can implement remote disconnection.
Yes, remote connect and disconnect, correct.
Okay. And then do you envision use of or implementation of prepaid service plans? Is that something you would seek?
I think it's too early to decide. I think the record of prepay across the country is mixed. There have been a number of unsuccessful attempts at prepay and maybe a small handful of those where they have been successful. In order for prepay to be successful, it really requires an alignment of both the technology, which we'll be delivering, but also a willingness to use the tool the way it's intended, which is to effectively use that disconnect to signal to customers that it's time to recharge their account. So that I think would require as much a policy discussion as it is a technology question.
Yeah, I would agree. And finally, like maybe this is more of a comment than a question, but a lot of the benefits of advanced metering are contingent, right? They're contingent on tariffs. They're contingent on customers' ability to respond, the nature of their usage, and so on. So, I assume you're sort of making realistic assumptions about some of these things. I mean, I think we probably, from what I know, and I haven't studied it real recently, but storm recovery, pretty there's some evidence there, right, of outage monitoring and restoration, that capability. But a lot of the inside the house functions are very dependent. I mean, it's not as if people all of a sudden are going to go to the big box store and buy a bunch of smart appliances, right? So they're some of these things are really more contingent.
I agree entirely, and I'm so glad you posed that point there, Commissioner Beecher, because we recognize that, as I said, we're updating our AMI plan and analysis for filing later on, so you'll see this when we ultimately file it. But in the meantime, what I can say is that in our plan that's on file in Massachusetts, you can see that we significantly discounted the benefits associated with customer behavior because of those dependencies that you talked about. The business case really is heavily dominated by those very large system benefits, which my colleague Ms. Schilling talked about there on the system optimization, as well as the O&M savings, which we're going to talk about on the next slide, obviously. Reducing a lot of unnecessary field trips, reducing non-technical line loss, and things like that. So I agree with your comments 100%. And the good news is that the business case does not rely on those to be positive.
Yeah, and I'll just note a personal note. You already know when I'm charging my car. So, all right, thank you.
I just had a quick question on one last customer question. How does customer service team handle a customer that's really adamantly do not install this smart meter in my home encounter?
Yes, we have what we call our AMI opt-out desk that deals specifically with customers who want to avail themselves of that option in Massachusetts. Basically, we have a very objective conversation, a non-judgmental conversation with the customer where we explain to them the benefits that they'd be foregoing, a lot of the things that I talked about related to the outage notifications, the intra-month alerts that will help them with their planning. And if after hearing all those benefits, they still want to opt out, we will allow them to do so. And according to the Massachusetts tariff and associated with the cost of having to do that manual meter read, then we just inform them that they will be incurring that monthly fee for that hands-on manual treatment instead of the AMI, the AMI solution. Yeah. Great questions. Thank you. Okay, so then the next slide it addresses those operational benefits that we talked about. So really, on the deferred capital front, there are the offset future capital expenses through the replacement of these aging meters with the new technology, which will of course refresh our in-service meter stock, give it many years of useful life, and also offering additional self-monitoring capabilities, meaning that over time we'll be able to more efficiently manage that stock to get more utilization out of it. More importantly, though, as we've talked about already, AMI reveals that trove of new system data down to the circuit and into the premise, which will, to Vice Chairman Aconti's question, allow more informed and efficient investment, presumably more utilization, and also to improve reliability and to accommodate electric demand growth with the electrification of various technologies. And then secondly, there are the direct operational O&M savings from reduced truck rolls via that remote order fulfillment that we've touched on a little bit, such as the remote disconnect and reconnect and remote checks to avoid no trouble found trips when a customer's breaker might have flipped and they think that's a power outage, but it's actually something within their home. Not to mention the obvious and frankly drastic reduction in meter reading costs. And then third, AMI reduces those hidden costs like non-technical line loss, which is the fancy term that we use for theft and tamper situations. And it also enables that volt-var optimization to reduce those hidden inefficiencies of the grid. So any questions on the operational benefits before we move on to talk about the current meter stock?
Quick question for you. What is it roughly a cost to put one of these meters in fully loaded? And then when you add up, have you ever made an estimate of all these benefits, and what would be the sort of the payback time on the meter cost?
Excellent question. So on your second question, I'm going to, if you will maybe be patient for about 2 months, we're updating our benefits and cost analysis, and that will be included in all of that. So I don't want to quote a number on the record right now regarding payback because it will be contingent on the outcomes of that analysis. But on your first question, without betraying proprietary information in an open session, what I can say is that the fully loaded installed cost of a meter, probably think of something in the mid between $100 and $200. Okay. I can be more specific, but probably we need to do that confidentially.
That's fine. I was just trying to, get a general gauge of it.
Yeah, kind of right in the middle of that range.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on the operational benefits? All right, then moving ahead to the next slide, we can see that really the point of this slide is to talk about our AMR meters. So we can see that the time is now to commence planning for AMI. 50% of our CLMP meters are at least 15 years old as of today. So that means that at the time we would reach the height of the AMI meter deployment, which would be in about 5 years, 670,000 meters would be 20 years or older. So that's the point of the slide. I'll pause here and see if anybody has any questions on the age of the current meter stock.
What's your depreciation schedule for a meter?
I believe it's 20 years. I might ask one of my finance colleagues to confirm that. But
yes, that's right.
20 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so then if we move to the next slide. So we are eager to move forward. And so to that end, we would like to present 3 scenarios. And this is scenario 1, which is based on the fact that we are actively deploying robust technology solutions in Massachusetts. And what I want to point out is that those technology solutions were selected through thorough competitive solicitations. And in several cases, the contracts pertaining to them were executed with consideration of options to extend pricing and terms to Connecticut. So if we are able, through rigorous reviews, obviously, with the vendors, to confirm access to advantageous pricing and terms from our established vendors, that would allow us to more expeditiously bring the benefits of those established technology integrations to Connecticut. And that would put us in a position of being able to conduct RFPs for the project management and implementation services, and then move ahead on a roughly 5.5 year timeline to meter deployment completion. So I know I said a lot there. I want to pause there and see if you have any questions about the timeline for scenario 1 before we move to scenario 2.
So how do you deploy? Do you try to concentrate geographically in order to get the benefits of all the meters working together, or what happens if you have sort of a dispersion of them? Do you need a critical mass to have value?
Exactly. So we have basically it starts. The first thing we do is we deploy the communications network. So using Massachusetts as an example, we started in Western Mass and several months well in advance of the meters being installed, and we went out to all the pole locations and other locations we were using to install those cellular access points. And then essentially work center by work center, we would build up clusters of meters, building out from those access points because of the mesh technology. So the meters don't need to be close to the access points themselves. They just need to be close to another meter that's close to another meter, et cetera, that happens to be close enough to an access point. So the data will often hop multiple meters through that mesh in order to get to that access point. And so in our urban areas or suburban areas where there are fewer brick walls and things, but still pretty good housing density, we'll have really, really strong mesh because we'll have a lot of meters and not a lot of impediments. So we try and build with our vendor network engineering partners to essentially build around those clusters of meters and expand the footprint to make the mesh as reliable as possible as we add those new meters on the fringes.
Thanks.
So if I could ask, so your build out, does it take into account the age of the meter stock that's already out there and the condition and where it is in terms of depreciated value?
No, because so again, using the Western Mass as using our Western Massachusetts deployment as an example, that deployment started in earnest in August and will be done within the next month and a half. So we basically went from based on efficiency. And I would also add too that, and I haven't really studied this, but I don't believe that there are clusters of meters in certain areas that are older or less old than others. So what makes the most sense is to build it out based on network efficiency and area work center, rather than trying to cherry pick the areas that have the meters that that might be the closest to retirement.
I was going to say though, do you estimate the sunk cost? Which will then be stranded cost?
Yes, our benefit and cost analysis will include an estimate of the stranded cost of the remaining meters.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Is there salvage value? Sorry, is there salvage value in meters that you take out and a way to monetize that?
Interesting question. So we have, what we're actually finding is that we're able to potentially take some of the AMR meters out of Connecticut and actually recycle them and put them into our inventory. I'm sorry, take some of the meters that we're retiring in Massachusetts, refurbish them and put them into inventory in Connecticut to offset more expensive brand new meter purchases. So what we're finding is that the kind of the internal salvage value is really the most lucrative, and I use lucrative with a with a smile, the most lucrative of potential salvage values.
How do you figure out the transfer value, transfer cost when you move from one utility to another with a piece of used equipment?
Oh, I would have to defer to my accounting.
Presumably there has to be like arm's length and some sort of
yes,
yeah, some sort of methodology that people agree with.
Yes.
Yes, this is Doug Wharton. I can confirm that. I would assume it is at the net book value of whatever is on the other utility. It's just transferred at the remaining net book value. But that was one point I wanted to make to Commissioner Beecher's question. There is a disconnect between the useful life of the meters, which are approaching the end and in need of being replaced, and the accounting life or the rate making life. There is an unrecovered balance of the meters, in spite of the fact that the meters will need to be replaced, and that's something I'll be talking about in a few slides on as we think about cost recovery.
Wonderful questions. Any other questions on scenario 1 before I move to scenario 2? Okay, then moving to the next slide in scenario 2. And this essentially contemplates that we received direction to conduct essentially a blank slate technology selection process. So if we had to start from scratch and revalidate the technology selections that we've made, or even if we're comfortable with those technology selections already, but we were to approach our existing vendors and find that the advantageous pricing and terms from our current technology vendors cannot be confirmed for CL&P, well, that would mean that we would have to go through a more rigorous kind of bottoms-up technology review, and that would add potentially a year or more to the timeline, meaning roughly 6.5 years from launch to the completion of the AMI meter deployment, which is, again, scenario 2 here. Any questions on scenario 2?
Do you have any reason to think there have been any positive technology changes since the Massachusetts elections?
I can say that I believe that we are very confident in our technology selections and their relevance. Okay, so then let's move to scenario 3 here. This, of course, is a scenario which we do not favor because it is the gradual deployment of AMI as AMR meters reach the end of their useful lives. So this is suboptimal for several reasons. First of all, Connecticut customers would have to wait much longer on average for the individual benefits to come to them when their AMR meter retires. And then those system scale benefits that we've been talking about, such as advanced outage detection, VAR optimization, conservation voltage reduction, TVR options, those would all be delayed for all customers until critical mass is reached. And then frankly, it's just less efficient to ask vendors to keep their A players engaged and available to us for the better part of a decade. And what that means is that the implementation pricing will likely suffer as well. And of course, we'd have to maintain an AMR system in parallel with an AMI system for a much longer period, meaning more cost for an inferior experience. So in short, if I were to summarize the 3 scenarios, an expeditious AMI deployment under scenario 1 maximizes benefit realization, minimizes the costly dual system period, and aligns with policy expectations, while an AMR end-of-life rollout under scenario 3 would erode the overall economics and delay core AMI value for most customers.
What's your timeline in Massachusetts rollout? Yeah, your Massachusetts.
Thank you for that question. We commenced our meter deployment. Like I said, the first meter was installed in July of 2025, and we intend to be substantially complete by the end of 2027 with just some cleanup into 2028. Now, to reconcile that with the 5.5 years, there were 3+ years of customer information system modernization, MDMS, meter data management system installation, other system integrations all before that. So when you hear me quoting 5.5 years, 6.5 years, that's not just the meter installation piece, that's all those system components that we will have to upgrade for Connecticut in order to be able to accommodate those meters that will then go in the back end of that 5.5 year time frame.
So if you haven't said it, what's the expected life or give a range of the expected life of the new meters?
They're warranted for 15 years.
Okay.
And similar to current meters.
My understanding was actually usually the expected life is a little shorter than with the traditional meters.
What I can say in an open session is that we have a 15-year warranty and protections if they underperform that.
Fair enough. And then what about risk of obsolescence, which could be shorter still?
So, yeah, again, I think kind of going back to the comment I made earlier on, these are the AMI 2.0 meters, which have the distributed intelligence app environment. And so, the basic functionality of a meter today of taking commands, sending usage data is completely enhanced by the capabilities of that distributed intelligence environment within each meter, which will expand over time with the with the capacity, with the functionality that might be added from apps that are developed. So I think with that new distributed intelligence feature, there's less likely to be obsolescence over that 15-year warranty period.
Thanks, that's all.
Okay. Mr. Horton, I think I'm turning it over to you.
Yes, and we can move to slide 13. And so here this just shows, and as Mr. Lawrence said, that we're in the process of refreshing our cost and benefit analysis, so the numbers will be updated, but just to show the trajectory, which we would expect to hold roughly in line with what you see here, which is that the costs are predominantly upfront costs with large lumpy capital expenditures necessary in order to enable the AMI implementation and all of its related system benefits, which, just given the magnitude of expenditures, is unusual on its own, and it's not conducive to traditional rate recovery, particularly since a large portion of the investment is information technology that has a much shorter amortization life than many of our other traditional investments that are recovered over a longer time frame, and then therefore can be more the expense on the company can be more gradual as well, which is why we're part of this process. And since this iteration of AMI, which actually started in 2019 in Connecticut, part of our from the beginning has been requirement to have recovery aligning closely with the cost incurrence. And so that's really what we're trying to convey here. Another thing to point out, and Mr. Lawrence touched on this too, is that the benefits, which there are many and significant benefits in line with the costs that we're incurring, by and large accrue to the benefit of customers in other aspects of their utility bill, not directly related to the local distribution charge. Just as an example, when we moved from electromechanical meters back in the early 2000s to AMR meters, we could at that point make a business case that was justified on, if you were to look at just the costs to implement that system and then the expected benefits of implementing that system, were by and large benefits that were accruing directly to the utility. Cost savings, efficiencies, et cetera, that would support and substantiate that level of investment at that time. Whereas now when we look at AMI, there are a number of different things that AMI can deliver that will produce real and tangible benefits to our customers. But as Commissioner Beecher pointed out, some of them will rely on customer participation. That's going to be dependent on a customer's willingness to engage, or at what point in time they're ready to engage in a way that will produce meaningful benefits. Or other systems that we'll be installing in tandem as part of AMI that could reduce and present efficiencies in, for example, the supply portion of a customer's bill, which doesn't produce any material benefit to Eversource itself. So the point is to say that's another reason why from the beginning we've been needing to have a supportive regulatory mechanism in order to make the investment on the timeline that we think is most beneficial for our customers as well. And we can move on to the next slide.
Mr. Horton, what line item on a Connecticut customer's bill, like in theory, would this appear on?
The cost side would most certainly be in the local delivery. It would be a cost of, Eversource Connecticut. It would be just like any other of our capital expenditures that we would make. The benefits, though, would accrue across the board, and depending on how you evaluate those benefits, potentially not even in a utility bill, but in other aspects of value that a customer would see.
So aren't there other capital projects that have a similar pattern, independent of the cost recovery mechanism, the accounting? So I want to sort of parse, the accounting challenge of the capital costs hitting. I understand what you're showing here, and that's useful, but that is a separate question from the cost recovery. I mean, in regulatory accounting and rate making, we've had this problem before, right? Where you've got to sort of spread costs or amortize them a certain way. So is there some, I guess what I'm asking, is there something distinct about this challenge that you think is different from other capital projects that you might engage in?
I just want to make sure I understand. I mean, the answer is a definitive yes, in that the magnitude, the scale of the investment that's necessary here, and the fact that it's not replacing other necessary investment, meaning, if we're talking about roughly $1 billion, the numbers have changed and frankly gone up over time since we started in 2019. That is a level of investment over the next 5 years that would be above and beyond investments that we'll need to make for the general operation of the system. It's not in replacing anything else, or if we did have to do it by replacing other investments that we would make, customers would experience impacts of the lack of investment, in needed investments elsewhere, if I'm saying that clearly. So that's number one. The magnitude is such that no, it is not like other investments, at least not that I see, which is why when you look at AMI deployments across the country, generally, in my review and experience, they have been accompanied by supportive regulatory mechanisms or federal funding, at least for some portion that came from grants back in the 2009 timeframe, which are not currently available to us. So that's number one. And then number two, and this is, I think, perhaps what you're getting at with any large, particularly IT investment, any large IT investment is going to have that challenge where the financial ramification to the utility or to its customers is outsized because of the fact that the amortization period is shorter. So that is, I think it's unique to the extent that AMI is a unique investment on its own, to my first point. But the fact that a lot of that investment is IT related, that has a shorter amortization period, but it's those things coming together that really requires there to be a companion rate making framework in order for us to be able to move forward. Not only is the fact that it is a level of investment, affordability is a focus on certainly all of our minds, and we know that it is of our Connecticut customers, and so we want to make sure that we have a good working understanding that we are going to have a supportive regulator to move forward with investment of this size. I think said simply.
That's a great point. And I have to always remind myself that it's a distribution company, as compared to, say, a vertically integrated,
That's right.
Which would have other types of capital projects to compare. But this is, relative to distribution company, yes, this is a substantial investment. So thank you for that. Commissioner Commissioner Smith has something.
Yeah, can you first let me say I have to jump off for a 30-minute call in a couple minutes, but I'll be back. And I'll review the record later for that portion. But can you describe some of the supportive regulatory mechanisms that you referred to that have been used elsewhere?
Sure. I mean, simply put, it's a cost recovery tracker in Massachusetts, as we can use as an example, where, we did have a robust process in Massachusetts, an extensive process as well, to go through this exact discussion. We had aging meters that needed to be replaced. The technology of choice is AMI. And so we see a lot of value in moving to AMI. But like Mr. Lawrence pointed out, in the absence of having a tracker effectively, the rollout would need to be slower and smaller, basically to try to fit it in to our capital expenditure program. Amongst others, it takes a longer time. In Massachusetts, our regulator and other parties saw the value of moving forward with AMI on an expeditious basis so that all customers would have the benefits of AMI and instead of having it be in piecemeal and over time. So in Massachusetts, the regulator has adopted a cost recovery framework that's an annual reconciling factor where we come in and present the investments that have been placed into service, which then gets reflected in rates on a concurrent basis. So we have timely recovery. We have all the rigor of any regulatory process there, where the regulator is reviewing all of our capital expenditures for prudency, ensuring that the dollars are spent wisely and consistent with the AMI implementation plan. And the same is true for incremental O&M expenses, where we're required to demonstrate that any O&M that we incur and are seeking recovery is incremental to dollars that are recovered elsewhere and are of a nature that are appropriate for recovery, meaning they're attributable to the AMI program.
And are you aware of any other states where any novel approaches have been taken that are different than what they did in Massachusetts?
To be perfectly honest, generally in my review of what's happened elsewhere, companies have deployed AMI with a tracker. if they've had the supportive regulatory framework has been the adoption and implementation of a companion cost recovery framework, much like what I just said.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll pick up on that since Commissioner Smith went there. So capital trackers are relatively new in the regulatory landscape. Maybe not so new anymore. They started with distribution system improvements and things like that. So, but they've kind of caught on. The original purpose of trackers was for expenses that are large, volatile, recurring, and outside of the control of the utility. And this type of expenditure doesn't really meet those conventional criteria for trackers. So is the argument more, while yes, I understand the nature of the expenditure, but is the rationale either you're proposing or you've seen elsewhere, is it more based on policy objectives and the idea of accelerating adoption? In other words, rather than conventional rationales for tracking costs, as compared to say something you could put into a rate case, right? You can come in for a rate case and you can have a capital improvement plan, and you can treat, that's the old school way, I guess, and then as compared to tracker. So yeah, what do you think is the key rationale or how you see the need for a tracker being essential here?
Well, it's a great question. I actually think that a lot of those prerequisites for a tracker do exist here. I understand your point of, things that are potentially outside of utilities control, but in my experience, a capital tracker is appropriate when we have a dynamic like what is on this slide here, where we have the need for, if first and foremost, let me take a step back. I think part of our challenge is, like I said, there are options here. We believe the best thing for customers is to move forward with AMI. Eversource has been a proponent of AMI, actually dating back to the late 2000s. There was legislation at the time that we were working on that was trying to advance AMI, going all the way back to 2009, if I recall. But our point then and continues to be that we need to have a supportive regulatory framework for two reasons. One is that it is a large investment, and to move forward with AMI and an investment of this magnitude, we want to make sure that we have the support and buy-in of our regulator and of other key stakeholders, because we can't be in a position where we are spending upwards of $1 billion or more on a system when we don't have that understanding that we all agree that this is the right thing to move forward and at this pace. Now, we've been at this for several years as part of this proceeding, but we continue to feel that way and want to make sure that we have a supportive regulatory framework to be able to move forward with AMI, because it is a level of investment that is significant on its own. When you look at the fact that it's the distribution company making the investment, and we really cannot tuck this in and fit this into our capital plan and push out other investments without having serious consequences that we just would not be an effective management of the system. So I do see it as we're needing to have a supportive regulatory framework for those reasons. And also, there's another benefit of having a cost recovery mechanism that tracks with the expenditures so that the rate impacts to customers are more gradual over time. As pieces of the system are placed into service, they're then reflected in rates. As O&M, and I'll talk about this on my next slide, but as the O&M is ramping up, it's slowly and gradually built into rates. And by working together, we can come up with a more gradual rate transition for customers, as opposed to, and we wouldn't be able to move forward with scenario 1 or 2, as Mr. Lawrence pointed out, in just a straight rate case framework for all the reasons that I've said today and are on the record. But the rate impact to customers in that scenario, meaning we install AMI and then come have a rate case, that would be substantial, because the whole system would be in. We would then have the $1 billion of CapEx or whatever it is. And I'm just using that number to be clear. That's just, order of magnitude in that range. And then the full level of O&M would all be needing to be reflected in rates for customers all at once, which would have a rate shock impact that I think would be ill-advisable. So there are some benefits too of having the capital recovery mechanism from a customer smoothing effect as well.
Yeah, I am familiar with that argument. Sorry, you triggered two more questions. I appreciate your
No, I
your
love it.
patience with me. You've said billion with a B a couple times. Can you give me a sense, since you said that a lot of the old meters are approaching end of life, can you give me a net number? In other words, if you had to just business as usual, you're going to replace everything with an old style meter as compared to the new one, what's the incremental difference of going to the smarter meter? Or
That
something
I
you
don't know
can
that I
think
can
of.
do. I don't know if we could probably think about that, or perhaps Mr. Lawrence can jump in. I don't mean to put him on the
Yeah.
spot by opening up the door.
I
It's
can
just some-
speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can
Go
speak to it qualitatively. I think again, I hesitate to quote actual numbers without
Sure.
without having our detailed BCA completed, which you'll have in a few months. But so the standard pretty much these days for a brand new meter is either a traditional, not traditional, that's the wrong word, a latest model AMI meter or a bridge meter. And bridge
Right.
meters are now exceeding $100 a piece anyway. So when you're just talking about the any cost savings from continuing to move forward with non-AMI 2.0 technology, those cost benefits are shrinking. So then the question is, when or how soon are we going to invest in the systems, the modernization of the systems to be able to take advantage of all the AMI data? And
Yeah.
that's more than half of the total program cost, right?
Okay, that's helpful. And then, but how about like offsets? Like, I'm seeing I'm seeing O&M go up a little, which is understandable. But should there be some cost savings on the O&M side from the technology, or I guess these are both just related to the implementation, right? But what about, again, offset to total O&M costs with the technology?
And there would
yes,
be
there are.
absolutely, yeah.
Sorry, Mr.
Jared, you
Woodard,
please
just
go.
take a read.
You please go.
Oh yeah, and again, we are updating these numbers, but essentially once you and this is just the cost trajectories here. This does not reflect the offsetting benefits, which essentially the cash flow associated with AMI, once you get to the end of the deployment, it hits an inflection point and it goes positive, meaning a net benefit to customers from that point on. And so once AMI is complete, you have many, many years of benefits accruing in the form of less cost being passed through to them, as well as the energy saving benefits, the benefits to the grid, et cetera, and the non-quantified benefits.
Thank you.
But just two important distinctions on that. The first is that absolutely any request for recovery, and this is important just to make sure that I'm being clear, we would expect no less than to have to demonstrate that it is incremental, meaning net of any other savings that we would be experiencing. If we're avoiding a truck roll, that would be a cost savings that would result in lower expenses elsewhere that we would capture and need to capture prior to us seeking recovery of any dollar under a companion rate making framework. The point, though, that I was trying to make is, even I think, and Mr. Lawrence would agree, when we show that benefit cost analysis from a customer perspective and it reaches a point where it is producing net benefits to customers, that doesn't mean that those benefits, and in large part they don't, accrue in customer savings to the distribution company. The savings that we get are minimal, frankly. In fact, there's more costs that we're having to incur. This ongoing green line, Commissioner Smith pointed out, there's a large cell bill. There's a lot of other incremental licensing fees that we have to incur to support AMI on an ongoing basis that come as added costs to the utility. That was the point that I was trying to make, is from a pure financial standpoint, the AMI program is added cost to the distribution company. And really that gets back to, and I see Commissioner Cheeseman, you have your hand up, but this is a key point for us, is this will result in higher delivery rates, distribution rates for our customers as we add this in. We still see there being significant value for our customers moving to AMI, unlocking all of these incremental technologies, which is state of the art, but it will result in higher costs to customers in that delivery portion of the bill. And that's something we just want to be and have tried to be transparent on from the beginning. But that's also why we need to have this supportive framework. And I'm being a broken record, is because just to be transparent about that point. Yes, there are benefits, but those benefits will accrue in other areas of a customer's bill, frankly, if nothing else. And that's why we need to have the supportive framework, not only to have the collaboration and support to move forward with an investment of this size, but also because it doesn't pencil out to the distribution company on a pure dollars and cents standpoint.
All right,
And
I'll
Commissioner
just
Susan?
jump in quickly, and I apologize. I had to leave for another meeting. And if you've already answered this again, I apologize that I missed it. What's the expected life expectancy of the new meters?
Mr. Lawrence was saying that they're warranted for 15 years.
All right, and where are they in terms of technology? I mean, since you started this process, have there been significant improvements, changes that would lead one to say, hey, is it worth waiting? I mean, or do you foresee an instance where, okay, they last for 15 years, but there's some great improvement made, so it would make sense to replace them? I'm just trying to get a read on where we are in the evolution of smart meters.
Yep. So we are one of the earlier adopters of AMI 2.0. It's one of the benefits of being one of the last EDCs to move forward is we can jump right to the newest technology. AMI 2.0 has increased features, and it also has a distributed intelligence environment, which allows additional apps to be installed as they are developed. So right now, we are working with our meter manufacturer to pilot some of the early stage apps related to meter health, premise safety, detecting EVs at the premise, solar at the premise to help us with system planning. But we envision a lot of new app development over time, which will frankly increase the capabilities of those meters simply through those software additions rather than the hardware. So we're confident that that this AMI 2.0 form factor with that distributed intelligence technology should remain relevant for certainly the warranty period and hopefully beyond.
So the upgrade possibilities with the current technology, because of the way it's structured, would allow you to continue continuous improvement without replacing meters. That's the theory.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
One last wonky question. Meters go straight to utility plant, right? And account 370 at time of purchase as compared to time of deployment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
All right, great. We can move on to the next slide. So here, I just wanted to point out the opportunity that we have and to try to clarify how securitization can come into play, because it can add value, but it can't be used for the lion's share of the cost in the prior slide. But, we've talked a lot about securitization as being an effective tool that the legislature provided for us and for our customers last year. We see tremendous value to be able to utilize securitization for certain types of costs, for instance, storm costs that have been incurred that are generally non-recurring one-time O&M expenses, things of that nature. Storms is a class of example where securitization can provide significant benefits to moderate customer bill impacts and save on carrying charges over time. It's also utilized in the past for stranded cost recovery. Here in New England in particular, for all of the Eversource entities, that's been the predominant use of securitization as we were through legislation required to exit our generation business in the past. Securitization for AMI can be utilized for these one-time O&M expenditures that Mr. Lawrence was speaking about. I know on the prior slide, and we don't need to go back to it, I know that the O&M line was generally increasing and somewhat choppy and flat, but when you look at the numbers, I mean, until it got to a steady state, but if you look at the details behind it, you'll see that there are a significant amount of one-time O&M expenses, things like training our customer service representatives, initial deployment, which are accounted for as expense. Certain things that we'll do as we're rolling out the initial deployment will be more one-time expense in nature, as well as certain things like customer engagement and outreach that will be more one-time in nature until we reach a steady run rate as AMI meters are fully deployed and installed. And so for securitization to work, and this is something that we would be updating as we're refreshing on our costs, there the one-time O&M expenses would lend themselves to securitized treatment potentially and allow us to then spread out the cost recovery of those costs, as opposed to having them hit customers' bills all at once and potentially smooth customer bill impacts as a result of that. And in addition, there is a balance of unrecovered AMR costs that will need to be refreshed. But it is of a significant level because the accounting is not directly in line with the useful life of existing meters. There is a balance of unrecovered AMR costs that will be on our books and then will need to be dealt with through recovery in some mechanism that would lend itself very well to securitization. And so this slide is really just to point out that depending on the nature of the types of costs, securitization is a tool that we can look to leverage. It would have to be, of course, as part of a separate process and a separate proposal with much more detail behind it. But we do now have enabling legislation that would allow us to take advantage of that, provided the benefits that I'm saying it delivers are real and we can prove them for customers. And with that, I can hand it over to Mr. Pace to take us through a few last slides, unless there are any more questions here. Vincent?
So we can move to the next slide, and I'm going to help at this point because we're talking about legal issues. We're going to be talking about interpretations of decisions and how they impact Eversource's decision-making. And so the concerns we have here, we raised these in our motion for reconsideration that we filed back on December 9th, and identified 3 obstacles to AMI deployment. I'd like to walk through each of those very briefly. And the first you see here is our conclusion. When I see a decision, I sit down with my clients and we talk about the words on the page. What impact do they have on our ability to move forward? Do we have comfort? Do we have reasonable assurance we'll be treated reasonably? And the answer for me as one of the company attorneys was no, for the following reasons. The first is, when you look at the words used in that December 2024 decision, they would result in disallowing up to $100 million of O&M. And here's why. When you look at page 17 of that decision, it estimated over a 5-year period back then, we would spend about $103 million. That's an outdated number on O&M, but that was the projection at that time. Then when you look at pages 17 through 19 of that decision, what they say is CLMP can recover O&M through a tracking rate, but only up until the time of the next rate case. And at that next rate case, you can only recover known and measurable O&M adjustments to future years. Well, the next CLMP rate case is projected to be June of 2026. And so why is that problematic? It's problematic because when you look at our motion for reconsideration at page 3, we identify many recent rate case decisions where rate year O&M was denied because the authority concluded the applicant failed to meet the benchmark for a known and measurable change. If a utility is not able to do that for a 1-year rate plan, think about the risk for CLMP with a 5 or 6 year deployment with very significant O&M. That just creates too much uncertainty for us that we won't be able to meet this very rigorous standard of a known and measurable change to O&M based on a forecast. Also, if you look at our motion for reconsideration at page 3, we point out there's some conflicting language in the PBR docket that calls into question if you can recover O&M for future periods. And so in docket 210515 REO1, we cite to some language that says you're not allowed to recover forecasted O&M for the rate year. An even more recent statement, I realize the docket hasn't gone final, but I looked at the authority's July 14th, 2025 proposed final decision in that PBR docket. It's docket 210515 REO1. What it says in Appendix A at page Romanet 4, it says the authority will allow symmetrical, known and measurable adjustments to O&M expense for the period between the end of the test year and the beginning of rate year 1 of the multi-year rate plan. So this contemplates a multi-year rate plan in the PBR framework, but says the most you can get is an O&M adjustment up to the beginning of rate year 1. That doesn't talk about our situation, which would be a 5, potentially 6-year deployment period with increasing O&M. And then lastly, the other concern we have about this issue is the decision does not allow CLMP the opportunity, if for whatever reason, even though this is a complex multi-phase project, it says if your O&M goes $1 over what you originally forecasted, we have no ability whatsoever to come into you and petition for cost recovery, even if we show Those were prudently incurred. So that's the first concern we have. We don't have the confidence we'll be given a fair chance to recover our prudently incurred O&M for a project this large. The second concern we have is the misapplication of the prudence standard. Now, the decision says over and over, we're not changing the prudence standard, but in all due respect, it is, and here's why. As the prudence standard says, the agency will look at the reasonableness of our decisions based on what our managers knew at the time they made those decisions. It does not allow the authority to look at after the fact results based on outcomes that occurred many years later to look at prudence. But the actual decision at pages 26 to 28 say you're going to look at actual outcomes to see whether or not we were prudent. And one key concern we have is a very significant focus of the authority is if we implement AMI, will customers implement and comply with time of use rates? Will they change their behavior? Will they engage in certain types of conduct? Now, we can educate consumers, and my clients have said they're happy to implement a robust program to educate consumers about the benefits of time of use rates, but we can't guarantee certain outcomes. The decision doesn't say if we fail to meet projections on time of use implementation, is that a $5 million disallowance, $50 million, $100 million? We have no idea. And then another concern that we have, which we point out in our motion for reconsideration, is PURA's discussion of the prudence standard. And PURA has a very wide open prudence standard. We cite in footnote 7 of our motion for reconsideration some statements that PURA made in a Supreme Court brief that it filed in 2024, which was contemporaneous with this decision. It said, and we quote in a different docket, Aquarion is wrong that prudence is the sole relevant factor in determining which costs it gets to recover. And PURA also said in that same brief, prudence instead is a flexible principle and only one of several PURA must consider in balancing consumer and shareholder interests. And so the concern we had was in seeing that the decision is going to look at whether certain benefits were achieved many years down the road and decide whether or not we obtain cost recovery. That's changing the prudence standard. And so for that reason, it's another obstacle. The final obstacle, which is more straightforward, and it's issue 3, is that the decision looks at an implementation period of 2025 to 2029, which is no longer realistic. And therefore, we ask for it to be updated. So if we can move to the next slide, I'm happy to take any questions. But if we can move to the next slide, we can talk about some solutions, if that's acceptable to the authority. And I see Attorney Minikowski has his hand up. I can pause there and see if it's a question for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you finish, Vincent, but I just wanted to note for the record that Attorney Pace is not sworn in as a witness, and this constitutes a legal argument in an evidentiary hearing. We think this argument is best reserved for briefing and potentially oral argument. I mean, I'm fine with the presentation continuing, but I just wanted to note that for the record that we have strayed away from evidence and into outright legal argument at this point. Thank you, commissioners.
What I would offer in rebuttal would be that the trigger mechanism for convening this hearing was the motion for reconsideration that we filed, which does contain legal arguments. And I'm not characterizing them as offering evidence. I'm characterizing this as offering arguments in terms of what the decision means and the legal implications for my client, which are preventing my client from moving forward. I'm happy to take any questions from the commissioners, but I do think as part of your deliberations, it's important to understand what are the legal impediments and problems my client has with the decision, and what are some potential solutions to those legal problems. I think it's important information the commissioner should have the benefit of understanding when you go offline and later in the docket to deliberate in terms of what you think the next steps should be in the docket.
And I understand that, Attorney Pace, but the proper vehicle for that under the UAPA is briefing and oral argument. And that's all I'll say. I'm just noting this for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney
Well,
Minikowski.
yeah.
Commissioner Beecher?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, Vice Chairman Arconti contemplates that. If you go back one slide,
Of course.
oh, thank you. And actually just generally in tying this to the concept of a supportive regulatory environment, would you consider a distribution system planning framework to be a supportive regulatory framework for consideration of things such as AMI deployment?
Maybe
This
Mr.
is Doug
Horton can
Horton.
help with this. Go ahead, Mr. Horton.
Thank you, Vincent. Yes, I think I think the devil's in the details, but generally I'd say yes. You know, in the companion PBR proceedings, which have been going on for a number of years, there has been discussion there about having an integrated distribution system plan of some sort. Our posture has been simply that we think it's a great idea. We think there were 3 PBR proceedings. I was more involved with the first, which was the rate making, but our general philosophy has been simply that any regulatory framework, whether we're talking about AMI or general distribution system planning or advancing the grid for certain grid modernization initiatives, whatever the case may be, at the end of the day, it boils down to ensuring that the appropriate regulatory framework is providing sufficient revenues to support the policy objectives of whatever it is, meaning we want to be partners with PURA, with the state of Connecticut, to advance certain initiatives. We absolutely do, AMI being one of them. We can't do that unless we have adequate revenues coming in. We just simply can't be incurring costs for things that don't have a revenue stream coming out on the other end. Dollars in equals services out. So at the end of the day, to get to your question, I think the answer is yes, provided that whatever comes out of that integrated distribution system planning process, whatever that looks like, there needs to then be some sort of a companion rate making framework that marries those things together. We wouldn't just, that we can't just agree that certain investments need to be made without acknowledging that there has to be a cost of those investments that needs to be paid for in the end by customers. So we can work together on how we do that, how we mitigate any rate impacts for customers. That's all of our jobs. We're here for that for sure. But I think that's what I would say to that question. I hope that was on point. Though
it was very,
it wasn't.
Very much appreciated. That was on point, but also recognizing there are alternative rate making options that regulators use for these types of investments. So I will go off there, and I like the others. I have to take a brief pause, but I'll be back. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, and I would just ask the company to make sure to include any arguments in its brief rather than today's hearing. Just try to be cognizant of that.
Thank you for that. And the next slide, Chairman Arconti, is one I did plan to speak to. If I have your permission, I'll be very concise, and we'll obviously go into more detail in the brief. But I do think, because we are talking about legislation and Supreme Court decisions that we think are relevant to your analysis, do I have your permission to very concisely walk through the next 2 slides?
I'm going to ask Attorney Minikowski if he has any thoughts on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I would just reiterate my objection, Mr. Vice Chairman. I mean, this is legal argument at this point, and that's fine. The company has the ability to make that, but there's a time and place for that, which is briefing and oral argument. We're here with a panel of witnesses today. Unless Attorney Pace wants to swear himself in and testify as to this, I think the proper role for this hearing is to have the fact witnesses testify to AMI and the company's status at the moment, whereas the arguments that Attorney Pace is making right now are better reserved for another venue.
Okay, I'm going to sustain OCC's objection, but Attorney Pace, if you want to, I'm just going to sustain the Attorney Minikowski's objection at this stage.
And what we can, and thank you for that ruling and that feedback. What we can do, though, is since we do have any fact witnesses, if they do want to offer their thoughts on the solutions we've offered, I'll allow my panel to do that, because the purpose for this slide is not only come here to identify problems, but to come to the authority and say we've identified some solutions. And these are solutions we'd like you to consider, which will provide more information in our brief. So Mr. Horton is a sworn fact witness. The OCC has no objection to Mr. Horton providing information about our solutions. So Mr. Horton can proceed to offer his thoughts on the solutions we'd like you to consider. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I won't do it nearly as well as you, Vincent, but I will do my best. So Vincent covered the three concerns on the prior slide. The first being a disallowance, a practical disallowance of nearly all of the incremental O&M that we would incur over the first 5 years. So as I discussed on my prior slide, our proposed solution would be that PURA approve the deferral of these one-time O&M expenditures, which would allow us to then put them aside to be dealt with through securitization after the full system implementation, which would have the benefit of not only mitigating that rate impact for those one-time costs, but also would allow us to align recovery of those costs so that the rate impacts that customers would see would be seen when the meters are installed. So there would then be a natural alignment between the benefits that customers are realizing through AMI with the costs that customers are having to pay through the incremental rates. The second concern that we have is that the decision misapplies the prudency standard. And so our request there is simply that PURA acknowledge the applicable legal standard, and in particular to not try to align or to tie cost recovery with the achievement of benefits that have a customer experience impact that is out of our control and is not tied to our decision making today. We can move to the next slide. And then the third is that, of course, and especially given the passage of time and where we are now, that we'll need to have a more updated, realistic implementation schedule in order to be able to actually execute on the AMI plan and not have it be cut off midstream. We can move on to the next slide. So the benefits that we see about this approach is that it allows us to move forward with AMI in Connecticut, something that we do want to do and want to be able to unlock for our customers. It's something that we've been proposing and like I said, since at least 2019, if not longer. And it's time that we do come to a decision to be able to move forward so that we can proceed with the latest and greatest technology, metering technology for our customers. Really in the end, what we're asking for is some sort of an enabling order by this PURA, obviously a brand new commission that would allow us to proceed updating our BCA. Doing this outside of a rate case we think will help, given that the rate case has a time-bound requirement and would push further delay until into 2027. If we can proceed with an enabling order sooner than that, it will allow us to move forward with all the prerequisites, updating our BCA, filing that with PURA, so that we can move forward and leverage those resources that are currently working on the pending Massachusetts AMI deployment. In the end, we're looking for trustful cooperation that would allow us to move forward, unlocking the highest value for our customers and at the lowest possible cost. We'll move on to the next slide. I think we can move to slide 19 if possible. And then there are a couple of other requirements within the decision that we would think would need to be modified. For example, time varying rates can really only happen later in the process. This is something that I do believe we have pointed out. We need AMI to be implemented prior to our development of thoughtful and detailed time varying rate proposals. We really will be relying on the data that the AMI system, including the meters, provides to us into how customers are using electricity, and that will help to inform intelligent time varying rate design. So at this point in time, we can have filed on record with PURA a time varying rate plan. It doesn't have specifics around proposals in particular rate designs. That would need to come later. And another change would be that we're not looking for and would not advise that PURA maintain this command and control approach, wherein each decision would need to be brought back to PURA before we could advance. That's not what we're looking for. When I say that we're looking for an enabling order, we know that as the utility, we have the obligation to be making decisions, and then we're held to review and scrutiny of the decisions that we make prior to us be given cost recovery. We accept that responsibility, and we don't think it makes sense for us to have to come back to PURA for each decision. But we do, like I said, we are looking for there to be trustful cooperation and looking to have an enabling order that would clear the three hurdles that are outlined in our motion and Vincent touched upon before, so that we can move forward with the rest of the process and begin to implement AMI for our customers in Connecticut. We can move on to our last slide, which just goes through the next steps for enabling AMI in Connecticut. including with a briefing schedule, an enabling order that would resolve and solve the obstacles that we've talked about today. That would allow us to proceed updating our benefit cost analysis, which we think we could submit to PURA by June 1st, and also to engage with other parties to the process on our draft implementation plan, which could be filed in August. And then once PURA has had a chance to review that and make any adjustments or approve that implementation plan by October 1st, it would allow us to kick off our implementation in January. But importantly, I know there are a lot of concerns on affordability and rate impacts for customers, and we would need to submit a lot more detailed information for you. I do think it's just important to point out that although we would be implementing our kickoff in January of 2027, rate impacts felt by customers would be felt later, especially if we do come to alignment in agreement that we can securitize those upfront incremental O&M expenditures. That would be subject to a deferral expense accounting treatment and later recovery, such that customers would not be seeing the first rate changes associated with AMI at least until 2028 or perhaps even later, all depending on the details of how it's actually rolled out. But allowing us to move forward would allow us to kick off the actual process in January 2027. That takes us to our slides, and please.
Oh, sorry.
I'm done.
Sorry. Well, okay. So most of my pre-questions were answered through your presentation. But just kind of more of a clarifying question for me, and maybe I think better handled for your brief. So you're proposing securitization and a capital, like a hybrid securitization on the O&M and still a capital tracker, right? So for your brief, could you expand more on the deferred accounting with O&M and securitization for me in the brief?
Of course. Would you like me to try to elaborate now, Vice Chairman, or no? Just in the brief?
I'll wait for the brief. I do better reading than hearing words. Thank you, though. Before we do, I guess any other questions for the company at this stage before we move on? Okay, seeing none. Before we move on to OCC, I do want to ask Deep a couple questions if they don't mind.
I'd be happy to attempt to answer whatever questions you have.
Okay, thanks. Also, feel free, again, maybe these are better prompts for the brief as well. So, thinking this is a big investment and, a big deal, policy-wise, for the state in this docket. I know Deep is working on the integrated resource plan. So, speaking for myself, I would find it extremely helpful in kind of deliberating this decision and this potential investment with the state's 10-year long-term strategy in terms of what we want our grid to look like, what we want the customer interaction to look like, what our ultimate goals are on affordability, where our deployment goals are. So, I guess Attorney Nigro, I don't want to put you on the spot answering right now, but I'm really looking for that in the brief, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to consult with my client before responding to your question.
Okay, and then
I could say generally, I'm sorry, I could say generally that it may make the most sense to address some of these issues in a rate case, but otherwise I would respectfully request that opportunity to consult with the client.
Okay, and part two of the question, same, kind of going back to, scrolling back, the company's very first slide on the value proposition, and the acknowledgement of, Mr. Horton, that ultimately there will be an impact on bills in the delivery portion and keeping total bill impact affordability in mind. The Energy Efficiency Fund runs on a 3-year program cycle, collects north of $700 million from ratepayers per 3-year cycle. So would Deep look to make adjustments to the conservation load management fund given the deployment of this type of technology, so we're not doing redundant things on behalf of the customer. It while also keeping in mind bill impact if this investment ultimately goes forward.
Thank you very much for the question. I would again appreciate the opportunity to consult with my client and respond in the brief if that's okay with you.
Perfect. Just wanted to get those thoughts out there for the briefs kind of stuff I'm looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. OCC.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Claire Coleman, Consumer Counsel. My colleagues, Attorney Minikowski and Attorney Bandari, have some questions, but they were graciously flexible in allowing me to jump in just to ask a couple follow-ups from the very helpful discussion that Eversource representatives had with the commissioners. I really appreciate the great questions and triggered a lot of additional thoughts from us as well. So I just have a couple follow-ups. I'm going to jump around a bit. I think the first, I guess, bunch I'd say are related to benefits. And I know that there was a helpful discussion about the potential benefits to customers as well as societal benefits. On page 6 of your slides, I think, the peak load reduction benefit was characterized as a societal benefit. And I recognize there are some benefits to those non-Eversource customers as well, due to reducing load. But I just wanted to clarify that you would agree that that would also be an operational benefit with the potential for deferring capital investments.
I can speak to the cost recovery piece of that. I would ask Ms. Schilling or Mr. Lawrence to talk about the operational impacts. I think that's true, but the cost impact is that the reason, if this is where you're heading, that there still needs to be cost recovery associated with the incremental investments made for AMI is that to the extent we can defer or avoid future capital expenditures, that will result in additional savings to customers down the line. It won't have any impact on expenditures that have already been made, which in Connecticut, we're relying on a historical test year. And so there wouldn't be any offsetting savings from that particular example in terms of what customers are paying for today. In other words, to the extent we can have lower peak usage and avoid an investment in the future, that is a tangible, real benefit to customers that should be taken into account. That's not going to result in a lower rate. It's going to result in a lower rate than what customers would otherwise see.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Schilling, did you want to add anything to that? I saw you're off mute. So
Yeah, no, unless you had any follow-up, I think I would say, I was just going to kind of say the same thing more from an engineering perspective of our planning process, which would be forward looking and start to see the load shape and forecast the load shape changing, which would then affect our future plans and would have future impacts on customers. But but we to date haven't quantified any of that in our business case, just given the nature of the time and the locational value and the uncertainty associated with that. But yes, as we started to see flattening load shape, that would affect the forecast, which would affect the capital plan, and that would roll through as benefit to customers, as Mr. Horan said.
Okay, thank you. And then it was the same slide under operational efficiencies, and there was some discussion about the truck rolls. I apologize if this was asked. I don't think I heard it, but just curious, mention in terms of the costs related, the reduction in costs related to reducing truck rolls. Does Eversource have an updated number, say for 2025, on how much the company spent on truck rolls for disconnections and reconnections and other activities that would be avoided with AMI?
I do not have that for this discussion right now, but we can certainly follow up with that and whatever their appropriate vehicle is after this hearing.
Okay, sure. I don't know if we're doing
We're
late
happy
files
to if the commissioners are fine with
supplements.
that. Yeah, we can file it as a late file if that works for the Consumer Counsel, or we can supplement an existing data response, whatever is more convenient for the commissioners and the Consumer Counsel.
however the commissioners prefer to proceed.
We're gonna make an announcement at the end around next steps.
Sure.
So I think maybe that will answer this question. If it doesn't, let me know.
Okay, great. And then on the benefits of the enabling the ability to implement time of use rates, just wanted to clarify I know there's a recent rollout of AMI in Massachusetts. Have Massachusetts customers since converted to more granular or different time of use rates now that as they're receiving AMI deployment? How has that worked?
No, I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, Attorney
No,
Coleman.
go ahead.
No, so our plan in Massachusetts essentially lays out in more detail what Mr. Horton was referring to in the presentation, which is that we are essentially need to achieve three milestones first. We want all customers to have their AMI meters. We want to have a period of experience with the interval data on those customers so that we can then engage with stakeholders for a more thoughtful design, which is why we are proposing a timeline for TVR that is different from what was ordered in the previous PURA order, which actually mandated that TVR design at the filing of the plan, as opposed to having the benefit of actually observing customer experience with the interval meters post-deployment. So our commitment in Massachusetts is to be able to accommodate both distribution company TVR as well as supplier TVR at the beginning of 2029, which is about a full year after we intend to be substantially complete with the meter deployment.
Thanks, that's helpful. And I think Commissioner Cheeseman, did you want to jump in with a question there?
Yes, it's sort of a follow-up. Could we see your Massachusetts plan?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Coleman, or Consumer Counsel Coleman.
Sure, anytime. So with respect to the Massachusetts plan and the AMI technology that's referenced in the presentation that Eversource is intending to deploy here in Connecticut, it seems, so just confirming it's the same technology that you're deploying in Massachusetts. Is it also the same technology that was included in the AMI plan submitted here in 2021, I believe, the first AMI plan, if I'm remembering correctly?
So that's a difficult question to answer, Attorney Coleman, simply because there are certain requirements in REO2 and REO4 regarding our conducting detailed competitive solicitations from scratch. And so that's essentially why the differences between scenario 1 and scenario 2. So scenario 1 that we presented contemplates our essentially re-engaging with our existing vendors, seeing if those contractual options that were alluded to when we were originally moving forward in Massachusetts, whether they're still available for Connecticut, and then presenting that to PURA. Whereas if we need to start from scratch, then I think the assumption there is that the technology selections would need to be rejustified from a blank slate.
Okay, and when you say that the technology selections would need to be rejustified, those technology selections, I guess the current benefit cost analysis is under the assumption that the AMI technology that Eversource would move forward with is that was proposed in the 2021 AMI plan and that Massachusetts is deploying?
So the 2021 filing was completed before any of our sourcing activities for our technology selection. So it was essentially generic non-technology specific assumptions, which is why we are actively working to update our benefit cost analysis for our upcoming June filing with the latest information on what we have under contract and our experience with the assets in Massachusetts.
Okay, thanks. And I understand this is a cost recovery proceeding, but I think I share some of the continued concerns that may have been reflected in some of the previous questioning about as time moves on, are we still would we still be deploying technology that's going to remain relevant and not become obsolete, particularly in light of the proliferation of advanced, artificial intelligence. It sounds like from the responses to the commissioner's questions to this, that Eversource is not concerned that the AMI meter technology will become technologically obsolete before the end of its useful life. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. The distributed intelligence capabilities that these meters have and the AMI 2.0, which is the state of the art for AMI deployments these days, does offer that capability to expand as new applications on the software side can be added to the meters.
Okay, that's helpful. And then that actually folds into my next question, because I was wanting to pin down on the discussion around the warranty versus the life of the meters, and had a similar question about the communication system expected life. So I assume there's a difference between the warranties and the useful life of the meter. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, I can start, and then I might ask for my colleagues who are more familiar with the rate making and asset accounting. But my philosophy is that we should only, from a planning perspective, assume reliability as long as the manufacturer is willing to warrant it. And so when asked what is the useful life, what I would say is that we were able to secure a 15-year warranty with penalties for failure for those meters to perform that. So that essentially, without going into too much confidential detail of the contracts in an open forum, that essentially makes us and customers whole in the event that they do not satisfy that 15 years. Now, do meters typically last longer than 15 years? Yes.
Okay, and then on the communications side, I guess I have a similar question, since the meters are just a fraction of the cost, and you did mention the communication system would have the capability to be updated through software updates for example, AI updates or other emerging technologies. Is there an expected life for the communication system?
Yes, we would expect a similar life too, but we're also only talking about a few thousand nodes versus well over 1 million nodes. And so it's much easier from a hardware perspective to update them if necessary, if they become obsolete. Not saying that I would expect them to, but again, we're not talking about a massive change out, which is a significant driver of the overall cost of the project, like the meter technology is itself.
Okay. And then I think I heard you say that the AMI will tell customers, what they're using, what their specific power use is, or something like that. Can you just clarify that?
So yeah, there are. So first of all, from a customer data visibility, they will be able to go through the customer engagement portal and view their data in near real time. So we consider near real time as soon as the data has gone through that meter data management system validation, those validation steps. And so that's typically within 24 to 48 hours after they've consumed it. They'll also be able to download complete reports for up to 2 years of their usage and share that information with third parties who might be coming to them with rate offers or other energy service offers. Additionally, once a customer has had typically about 4 months of usage, they have built up enough of a profile to start to receive those bill disaggregation reports I talked about, which infers through fairly confident analytical techniques what are the biggest drivers of consumption behind their meter, so that they can take steps maybe to make this appliance or that HVAC component more efficient as well. Over time, though, once we get to the TVR space that we've talked about, ideally being after the deployment is complete, there will be additionally rate comparison tools that will be available to help customers weigh, using their recent consumption history, all of the different offers, the growing portfolio of rate offers that might be available to them, so they can pick it using analytical techniques. Those are just some of the examples. Oh, and then the other thing I mentioned too is the bill alerts, which a customer will be able to essentially in the middle of the month set a alert to let them know when if they're moving toward a certain dollar amount so that they can adjust their behavior.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. When you said real-time data, just to clarify, what does that mean to Eversource? Is that instantaneous, 24 hours, 48 hours?
I believe I used the term near real time. I apologize if I didn't say near real time.
You might have.
Yeah. So near real time is the data that are available after that validation process that takes place in the meter data management system, which is making sure that there weren't any errors or gaps in the data. Once those data are available, then they are made available through the customer engagement portal and the Green Button Connect data sharing system, and that typically is 24 to 48 hours after the actual consumption. And that's just to make sure that we're not giving customers data that for some reason ends up not agreeing with ultimately how their bill is calculated because there was a problem with that instantaneous data that then had to be repaired by the MDMS.
Okay, thanks for going back through that. That was helpful. On the, I think moving on to the meters, I think on your meter slide, you showed the number of meters that are, bridge AMR meters. Do those bridge AMR meters, are they a bridge meter in the sense that they can convert to AMI technology once you have the software?
They can, however, we very early on in our planning at Eversource adopted a kind of no second-class citizen approach. And so they don't have the AMI 2.0 capabilities. And so we worked out with our meter vendor essentially an attractive swap out provision in the contract to ensure that all customers would, at the end of the deployment, have the latest technology.
Okay, so
technically they're compatible with AMI technology in general, but they may or may not be ultimately compatible with the network we end up moving forward with in Connecticut. And if not, we would work on a similar commercial agreement in Connecticut to make sure all customers enjoy all the benefits.
So that would it sounds like you would propose to scrap the AMR, the bridge meters, and replace them with AMI, and I assume that that's accounted for in your cost analysis?
Yes, but I would say it was accounted for in our commercial negotiations with our vendor.
In Massachusetts?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I think I will cede the floor to my colleagues. I appreciate the discussion. And I'm not sure if Attorney Minkowski or Attorney Bandari is following me.
Council Coleman, do you mind repeating the information request you made at your back and forth at the beginning of your questions with the company?
Sure, I think it was the cost. Hold on, let me scroll up on my notes here. Gosh, is my memory that bad?
Consumer Council Coleman, it was the avoided cost of 2025 truck rolls.
Right, thank you.
And I just was going to chime in. I know Vice Chairman. I'm so sorry. I think I'm delayed now, but I just was going to chime in on that, Vice Chairman. I know you're going to have an announcement at the end, but for my 2 cents, that is absolutely relevant information. I think it would all be part of the BCA update that Mr. Lawrence had mentioned, meaning it would be, part of that comprehensive update, that and other cost and savings like it. So certainly we're happy to provide information in whatever form you all want us to, but I just wanted to point that out, that whatever it is, that assumption will be updated in the latest CA.
So I think if it were amendable, since it's an open docket, we're actually on LFE 11. So I was going to make this request from Council Coleman, LFE 11, and Commissioner Cheeseman's Massachusetts plan request, late file exhibit 12. And if those could be submitted by the end of the day, Monday, the 23rd. And then we can evaluate after that if we need to have a LFE hearing, if there's any cross on those.
Vice Chairman, can I just check with the clients? Are they able to meet that deadline? Mr. Lawrence, are you able to meet that deadline for both documents that were requested?
So my understanding of LFE 11, it was not the avoided truck roll costs, but what were the total truck roll costs for Connecticut in 2025? Is that correct?
Yeah, we were using 2025 as just a proxy for the annual savings. We're certainly open to other data points if you think they'd be helpful as well.
Well, I think the level of specificity determines how quickly we can turn it around. So were you looking specifically for the truck roll costs associated with a disconnection, reconnection, no trouble found? Which ones?
I had disconnection, reconnection mine, but if that, I mean, a total, you're tempting. The breakdown sounds helpful as well.
Well, okay. I will endeavor to, I think by Monday we can provide the disconnection, reconnection, truck roll costs, as well as the no trouble found truck roll costs for Connecticut. That shouldn't be a problem.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And actually, Mr. Horton's clarification and comment on the BCA also sort of triggered a question I had regarding your previous statement, Mr. Horton, and as reflected in the slides, that an updated cost recovery decision would allow Eversource to do an updated BCA. In my mind, a BCA would happen first, right? Or an updated BCA to help inform what the appropriate cost recovery timeline, et cetera, is. So I'm just curious from your perspective, is there something holding Eversource back from doing an updated benefit cost analysis now without that updated, any revision to the authority's final decision?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think the reality is that moving forward with AMI is a sizable undertaking for Eversource, for all of us. We know that, and certainly for our customers. Updating the BCA, I think, is pivotal and critical because with the passage of time, costs have gone up. So it's important from our perspective to have the latest information available and on the record. We don't want to do that, and it wouldn't be efficient for us to do that without some clear direction and guidance. And this proceeding has been going on for several years. We don't need to rehash it all, but there's been some things standing in our way of actually moving forward. And I think from our perspective, if we can get a decision that tells us, we can clear these hurdles, we can clear the 3 plus some other more logistical concerns we have with the prior standing order, that's the prerequisite that we need to be able to go and refresh on the data, because just updating the costs, the benefits, that is not an insignificant effort for us to undertake. And so we totally agree that parties need to have full visibility into the costs as well as we do, but it's not something that we have just sitting on the shelf. It's an effort for us to undertake to go through. So while we're starting that process of working on it and had envisioned it being part of the rate case filing for the reasons that we've said, we think it would make more sense to do it on a different time frame, but we would need to have that prerequisite, like I said, the commission's enabling order, what have you, something telling us that we can move forward and start that process. But that there would be more process before PURA with the updated BCA prior to us actually implementing AMI in Connecticut. I think somebody pointed out that the last full BCA was in 2021. I can assure you that the costs are significantly higher than they were in 2021.
That's why we're eager to see it. And we'll reserve any argument on those issues and the related legal issues in briefing as Attorney Minikowski laid out. But thank you for clarifying that perspective.
Certainly. Are we settled on, I'm sorry, did I miss it? Are we okay with Mr. Lawrence and Attorney Pace, the 4 p.m. on the 23rd
Yes.
Is that doable? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I did miss it. So, okay, we'll make those Monday, the 23rd, 4 p.m. Thank you. Thanks. All right, back to you, Consumer Coleman.
Thank you, Vice Chair Conti. I am now going to turn it over to my colleague.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Consumer Counsel, Prabisha Bhandari for the OCC. To start, what AMI-related investments has Eversource made since the AMI cost recovery decision?
In Connecticut,
Yes.
we have not moved forward with AMI in Connecticut for the reasons that are outlined in our motion filed in whenever that was, the motion for reconsideration that is not yet advanced.
Thank you. So if not AMI, what investments has Eversource made to maintain its meters since the AMI cost recovery decision?
I can let Mr. Lawrence speak. Yes.
Yeah. Just essentially our normal inventory management, end of life replacements, as well as installations for customers, either establishing new service or adding distributed energy resources. It's the typical management of the meter stock, both in service and in inventory, has continued since then.
Thank you. Does Eversource have an estimate of how much money it's spent on metering, both AMI and analog, since the recovery decision?
We do, but
No.
I do not have that.
I mean,
Could we get a late file on that, late file 13?
So, can you read the prompt back for us, just so we're all on the same page? Thanks.
Sure. So we're looking for an estimate of how much Eversource has spent on metering, both AMI and analog, since the AMI cost recovery decision.
Okay. I will make that late file exhibit 13.
Ask the witnesses a clarifying question just to make sure there's no disconnect in terms of what we provide. So for late file 13, I just want to play that back. The question is from December 2024, when the decision was issued in this docket. They're asking for CLMP to provide investments we've made for standard metering installations. Is that a correct restatement of the question from OCC?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And the other question I just have for the witnesses are they able to provide that information in the time requested? Vice Chairman Arconti is looking for a due date of February 23rd, and I was just want to inquire if there's any difficulty in collecting the information for that period.
I believe so. The question was framed as investment. So if it's meter capital that has been spent since the last order, that should not be a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Eversource lists as an obstacle the inability to recover over 100 million in O&M, which they state would be recovered incremental to base rates. Can Eversource share additional details on how much the 100 million of O&M is incremental to what has been or could be included in base rates?
I can start. All of the cost estimates on that slide 13 and that we had presented, in prior filings in this docket are incremental costs associated with the deployment of AMI. So I think your question was, can we clarify how much of it is incremental above and beyond which is in base rates or otherwise?
Yes.
So the entirety of the $100 million would be incremental. Our concern, and Mr. Pace pointed this out in our motion, also explains the logistical challenge or discrepancy in that the AMI order was claiming to provide us 87% recovery of that $100 million, mostly through base rates. And we were just pointing out that it's just not feasible unless PURA was also intending to drastically change its way for setting base rates by relying exclusively on a forecast of the rate year 2 to 3 years into the future, which is not the current practice of PURA and certainly hasn't been over the last several years. So that was going to rely on or result in, I should say, a significant disallowance of almost the entirety of that $103 million of incremental O&M. There would be effectively nothing in base rates, and then by order of the prior order, nothing allowed in the tracker either.
Okay, and would this incremental O&M be time limited? And if so, for what period?
Are you saying would our request for the ability to recover incremental O&M, would it be time limited?
Yes.
So I think generally, yes, it would be, because, like I said, we're not looking for any sort of a blank check at all. Really, what we're looking for is to have a framework that provides us the opportunity to reasonably recover incremental expenses. And really what we're looking for is an ability to recover those one-time incremental O&M expenditures that would be incurred during the deployment period until we reach a normal run rate. And you can see on that slide, the O&M does level off. And if you look at the details behind it, and I think I tried to explain, although perhaps not well, that during the deployment period, it's choppy. That slide shows O&M going up, down slightly, and then back up until it eventually reaches a steady state. So our posture would be simply that we want and need to have the ability to petition for recovery of incremental O&M, particularly for those one-time upfront expenditures that are going to be lumpy and chunky and tied to the deployment, until it reaches a point where we have the AMI related O&M in base rates. It would be at that point in time where the answer to your question of, what amounts are incremental or not, when we are at a point in time where we can reflect a representative level of O&M related to AMI in our base rates, then it would no longer be appropriate to have a tracker for those costs. Those costs would then just be reflected in base rates. Our point and concern is that during the implementation period, we wouldn't have those costs either in base rates or through the tracker under the current wording of the order, which is why we need the order adjusted for that purpose.
Okay, thank you for that. So given the significant cost related to AMI deployment and upward pressure on customer rates, what steps has Eversource taken to seek out cost efficiencies in AMI deployment?
I think Mr. Lawrence can speak to some of the contractual negotiations, perhaps maybe not too much because it's, I'm sure, confidential, but there's elements there that I think we can speak to. But that's also why we're talking now and on our slides touched upon the potential promise for securitization as being another tool that we can look to help to mitigate customer impacts, especially associated with those one-time upfront incremental O&M, and also associated with any of the unrecovered costs of existing AMR meters. Because the fact is that although the meters are in need of replacement, the accounting lives through prior rate cases and rate decisions and the depreciable lives that have been applied in prior rate cases, and the fact that we've had to make ongoing just sort of routine replacements of existing AMR meters, there is going to be an unrecovered balance that would be excellent opportunity for securitization as well. So I think securitization is a tool for sure. And again, Mr. Lawrence can speak to some other things that we've tried to do as well.
Yeah, I would add to that. First of all, we are meticulous in our negotiation and contracting approach with our suppliers. Additionally, we manage our projects with very direct senior leader oversight as to the ongoing expenditures to make sure that we are achieving our budget targets. And then the other piece too is that the timeline that we are proposing in our presentation today would allow us to maintain the continuity of as many existing resources as possible in our existing project management organization. So the farther we get away from the existing and frankly well-functioning project management structure that we have right now, the more that we would have to start things from scratch with potentially on board. Warren is familiar with the way that Eversource is executing the project, which will add cost and potentially inefficiencies as well.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sorry, can I just,
of course.
Apologies, Attorney Bhandari. So would that, you're talking about existing project management, is that tied to your current rollout and implementation in Massachusetts, that basically
Correct.
You will be tasking using the same game plan and using many of the same methods that you're already doing in Massachusetts, and it would be a sort of continuous in Connecticut?
Correct, to the extent that, as I went through the scenarios in the presentation earlier, if we are able to substantiate through re-engagement with our suppliers on the Connecticut question that those technology selections are the most attractive for customer, that are the existing technology in Massachusetts are the most attractive for customers in Connecticut, then that would allow us to move forward pretty quickly with holding our competitive solicitations for our partners on the implementation side. And I think that there would certainly be benefits that competitors in those competitive solicitation would bring to bear in their bids, reflecting the fact that they already have their A players engaged in the Massachusetts deployment, and therefore would be less costly for them to continue to engage in the Connecticut deployment. And we would expect that to manifest itself in more attractive bids for the project management and implementation side.
And theoretically better savings.
Yes.
More savings. All right. Thank
Exactly.
you. And again, apologies, Attorney Bhandari.
No, of course, Commissioner Cheeseman. Last question from me. Has Eversource updated its assessment on the unamortized value of the meters that are currently in place?
No, it's been a couple of years since we've evaluated that.
Thank you. And how does Eversource plan to address this as part of their AMI deployment?
As I mentioned, the unrecovered balance of existing AMR meters would need to be cared for, and I'm hopeful that we could do so through securitization now that we've got that enabling legislation.
Great. Thank you so much. That's all for me. I'm now going to pass it on to Attorney Minikowski.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Andrew Minikowski, Legal Director for the Office of Consumer Counsel. Thanks to the panel for the presentation this afternoon and the questions so far and the responses. I just have a few more questions. My first is to Mr. Lawrence. It's actually a follow-up to something you discussed with Consumer Counsel Coleman regarding AMI 2.0 technology. And you had mentioned there had been some discussion that the AMI 2.0 technology, as software and technology advances in the future, that can, interface with that. At such time, if that occurred, would there be additional costs that would be accrued to essentially bring the AMI 2.0 tech into accord with any subsequent technological developments?
I think the answer to that is to be determined. So a good analogy for the distributed intelligence technology in the AMI 2.0 meter is it's like an app environment on a smartphone. And some of those apps are accessible at no cost, and some of them have a cost associated with them. So it would just depend on who's originating it, what their and our business and operational objectives are as to whether there'd be an incremental cost or not.
So it'd really be a case-specific scenario if there would be additional cost.
So, yes. Yes.
All right, thank you. My next question is more general about the state of meter technology, just on the whole at the moment. But has artificial intelligence, to your knowledge, impacted any capabilities of metering and its related communication systems?
Not to my knowledge. We have not used any artificial intelligence specifically in our meter to cash operations at Eversource today.
Okay. Do you know if that's something that's being implemented at other utilities around the country, or it just hasn't gotten there yet?
I haven't really heard of AI applications, as far as I can recall, outside of direct customer service.
Okay. All right. Thank you. My next question is, absent the proposed cost recovery mechanism for AMI, would Eversource still plan to deploy AMI in its Connecticut service territory? Actually,
Attorney Minikowski, I want to amend my previous statement. I forgot about an internal pilot we have here. We have a pilot in incubation that is looking at using AI to look at millions of meter inspection records to identify those that might be good candidates for follow-up theft or misconfiguration investigation. So circumventing non-technical land law. So it's not really being applied directly to the real-time metering capabilities, but kind of after the fact review of AMI records.
Interesting.
Not AMI. I said meter records, meter inspection records, not AMI records.
Right.
Yeah,
and if I can add, I mean, we're just scratching the surface on starting to explore with all this massive data. AI, machine learning, like that holds so much potential. We're just starting, and it's not so much in the meter itself. It's taking the data back, and then it's using the analytic tools and the, kind of the intelligence of massive data processing to come out with outcomes. Jared mentioned, and Mr. Lawrence mentioned one, a load transformer optimization. There's different ways that the analytics are going to drive value with AIML. It's not in the meter. It's more in what you do with the data. That
Right.
helps.
Thank you, Ms. Schilling. That's very helpful. I'll repeat my previous question just for the record, so we don't get lost. So absent the proposed cost recovery mechanism, would Eversource still plan to deploy AMI in its Connecticut service territory?
Mr. Horton, you want to cover that one?
Sure. I think a few points to make on that. And Mr. Lawrence, please supplement if I get anything wrong. I think the point is, and as we've said, we need to have the cost recovery framework in order to be able to move forward on the AMI timeline that we feel is best and most beneficial for our customers. So we would not be able to move forward with that timeline in the absence of an appropriate regulatory framework that would allow us to accomplish that. My understanding and expectation, and this is where Mr. Lawrence can chime in for sure, is that AMI is the state-of-the-art technology today. So for us, I would imagine eventually we would be moving to AMI. It's a question of when and at what cost and what would be the pace of implementation. And while we're moving forward with AMI in Massachusetts, we are also, because we have AMR in Connecticut and don't have an approval to move forward with the implementation plan that we're here today to talk about, our current plan and expectation is to try to refurbish to the extent we can those AMR meters that are taking out of service in Massachusetts to see if they can be deployed at a lower cost than an alternative AMI implementation on a slower schedule, and deploy those used meters in Connecticut. And so I think the point is that the likely AMI would be deployed eventually in Connecticut, but it would not be on a time frame, over the next 5 years. It would be something much slower and more gradual, and it would not have the same benefit realization as our AMI implementation plan for sure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Horton. So in terms of while we're talking about the cost recovery mechanism, just at a minimum, what are the attributes? I mean, your presentation answered this in part, but what are the minimum attributes Eversource would need to feel comfortable moving forward with the cost recovery mechanism?
I think, what I would say is the attributes, and I don't mean to skirt the question, we have the docket has been going on since 2019. And so our attributes of a cost recovery framework have been articulated in, multiple phases of this proceeding. At this point in time, we're really just down to the 3, and I would say 5, if you count that last slide, with some logistical concerns now that given it's 2026, the order was issued in December of 2024, the timeline needs to be adjusted. There are other things that need to be sorted out in the decision, but we are really looking for PURA to issue an enabling order that alleviates those 3 critical concerns that to this point have been a roadblock for us to move forward. Our fundamental, I guess to your direct question, our fundamental requirement from the beginning has been to have a cost recovery framework that provides for timely recovery of incremental dollars associated with the AMI deployment with full transparency and accountability, such that we're subject to regulatory oversight and review prior to any dollar being reflected in rates, period.
All right, so it's fair to say essentially what Eversource has presented today in its presentation is what you would need to feel secure moving forward.
That's right. Clarification of the 3 main items from our motion for reconsideration filed whenever that was is really what we are looking for at this point to be able to move forward. Everything else has been encapsulated in the decision, with the exception of those few other minor items that I also pointed out in the presentation. That's right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Horton. My next question involves securitization. It might have already been partly answered, but I'll ask it anyway. We had the 2024 decision in this proceeding, and in that time, we've had legislation that authorized potential securitization of AMI expense. And so I'm just curious, what assessments or analysis has Eversource completed to understand sort of what the different options are for securitizing AMI costs internally? Sort of how has that changed or not changed Eversource's potential approach to deploying AMI?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that in my view, securitization, as I said, is a tremendous enabler of customer value in specific circumstances. And those circumstances do exist to some extent in AMI. For instance, securitization could certainly help to alleviate bill impacts and carrying charges for customers on the unrecovered AMR balance that would be left stranded once AMI is fully deployed. That I think would be a no-brainer for securitization. That's sort of the classic example. The first example of securitization was used when utilities had the exact same circumstance for retired generation that had a remaining book value that needed to be recovered. So that would be a classic case where securitization can add value for customers. Another case would be if you have incremental O&M, the classic example there, for at least for me, is storm costs. That's not appropriate for base rate recovery as a recurring, ongoing, run-of-the-mill routine expense, but is a one-time in nature. And so some of the expenses that we look at would be appropriate for securitization to the extent that it would help to substantially mitigate the bill impacts for customers. I think there we would also need to evaluate, though, that securitization, although it has the lowest possible carrying charge, it has still a carrying charge that an O&M expense, if we were to have customers pay for that one time and upfront at the expense of having a higher bill impact, would not have a carrying charge implication. And so that's where really we would need to be very precise with PURA and with all parties as to the total cost to customers and demonstrate that it is a value for customers to move forward and securitize those one-time expenses. I do think certainly I would expect it to have a significant reduction from a customer bill impact perspective, but we would just need to be mindful of the fact that it does, like I said, have a carrying charge element that is an offset to that benefit. Where securitization cannot be helpful, though, is for the deployment of the AMI capital. When something is securitized, it's essentially dealt with separately. The value of securitization, in order to get that AAA rating and to go through that robust process, the cash flow and the underlying assets need to be really treated for and accounted for separately. And so for something like AMI or for meters, really, which is a core component of what we do in delivery of service to our customers, we're replacing meters, as the question was asked by Attorney Bandari. We're replacing meters every day, even in the absence of a full AMI deployment. And so once we install AMI, we're going to need to be replacing AMI meters. We're going to need to be adjusting and incurring incremental expense on them. And so for an existing or an ongoing capital expenditure, such as meters, although it is a one-time capital expenditure, securitization really is not the appropriate tool in order to be able to facilitate that that aspect of it. But I do think there's value in the other areas that I mentioned.
All right. So just to summarize, Mr. Horton, the actual capital costs associated with AMI would not be appropriate in the company's view for securitization?
That's correct.
And is it correct that the company earns a return on that?
Yeah, so like with all capital, the utility has to expend capital. We do so relying on both debt and equity. And equity investors, just like debt investors, require a return on their invested capital. And so that is true for sure.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Horton. I appreciate it.
Sure.
My next set of questions concern performance metrics, and I bring this up because it was something the company had raised in its motion for reconsideration as potentially an alternative approach for the authority to take in its reconsidered decision. And I'm just curious, it was sort of left open-ended in the motion, but in the company's view, what metrics should PURA look to determine if AMI is used and useful from a sort of performance metrics standpoint?
I perhaps can jump in and use the term used and useful. I think, again, our main concern with the order, to the extent it is trying to change the cost recovery paradigm to be tied to something other than used and useful, prudently incurred, the traditional cost recovery standards, that is our fundamental, I would say, legal hang-up with the fact that the prudency standard has been adjusted. So we're not looking and would never endorse, and we would not be able to move forward if PURA were to issue a decision that was still relying on PBR metrics or metrics of any type to be determining used and useful, and at least in terms of how I understand that term to be used. Used and useful means that we have an AMI implementation plan. We have articulated the benefits of AMI, and then we have made a decision to move forward collectively with the support of PURA and others to move forward with AMI. Used and useful is then when the systems are installed in conformance with that AMI plan and they're in service, used and useful to customers, that would not be changing or dependent on the achievement of a metric. However, we do also fully acknowledge and appreciate and agree with the fact that we as the utility have an obligation to deliver on those benefits where we can control them, where we have an obligation to try to work with our customers and educate them so that they are able to use energy in a different way that will produce the benefits that are outlined in our AMI implementation plan, but that wouldn't then be tied to the definition of used and useful or prudently incurred. That could be some other paradigm where there's either performance penalties or performance incentives for us doing, in the case of penalties, doing something poorly that is warrant of a penalty, or doing something very well that would warrant an incentive. But that would not be tied to the definition of used and useful in the traditional sense.
Right. I think we all know what the legal sort of standoff, everyone's in over the previous decision. But I'm just curious from the company standpoint, under a metrics-based framework, just for looking at, either incentives or penalties, what should Puro look to? What should other stakeholders look to in the company's view to see if AMI is being deployed in a way that is beneficial? Any thoughts?
You want me to take that, Mr. Horton? Or do you want?
Please. Thank you.
Okay. So this discussion came up in the I believe in the PBR proceeding. We are, I think our performance in terms of the success of the AMI program, it's fair to measure us on our making the benefits available to customers, the capabilities available to customers roughly within the time frame that we forecast and to the extent that we forecast. And then, but of course, drawing that very clear line that customers' choice to use them is not something that should put us at risk in any way from a performance metrics perspective. So adherence to our plan to roll out the network, adherence to our plan to deliver new capabilities within the filed plan. Those are the types of things that we think are fair, and frankly, we would be excited because we're confident we can execute on our plan well. It's just those variables that have to do with customer utilization of the technology where that's a risk we're unwilling to accept.
Great. I see Commissioner Beecher, if you have a question.
If I could interject on that point, as part of, business planning, don't you want to have a sense of customer acceptance and interest in something? I mean, you could implement all kinds of stuff, but you sort of want to have some data or some insight as to potential adoption rates, even if it's a range or some understanding. So in other words, who should bear that risk and that responsibility to find out whether there is an appetite on the part of customers for some of the features that AMI could offer?
So I think it's fair, and in fact, our BCA will ultimately forecast levels of customer engagement in the tools. But the question of whether that should be tied to financial metrics, I think, is one that that's a separate question because again, we if we all agree in moving forward that our forecasts make sense, there could be any number of factors that cause things to deviate from what was forecast from a customer behavior side, including the immersion of disruptive technology, something else that provides the customer another way to obtain that information. My understanding is that I mean, that obviously that kind of disruption to customer adoption of AMI technologies is not a risk that the utility should bear.
Beecher, if I could just add a legal argument, which is in the pending PBR docket, we have made the legal argument that to the extent that the authority seeks to impose financial penalties on the company in a PBR framework, they should be items over which the company has control. And our argument is that's consistent with the PBR statute that was implemented. I realize there are differing views on that legal argument, but that's the company's legal argument on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see you have your hand up, Consumer Counsel. Do you want to go first? And then I would add a question.
Thank you, Commissioner Cheeseman. I did just want to respond to Attorney Pace's argument and just note that OCC did take a different position in the PBR docket. As he noted, there were various positions articulated. We had a healthy, robust debate over what total control versus partial control and various factors, but OCC does believe that it's possible to parse out where there is an ability for Eversource or any utility to impact outcomes, even if there are other outside factors outside of their control. So it's not, in our view, as black and white as Eversource's presentation, and we're happy to brief that further at the appropriate time.
And my question was, what about those factors that do not depend on change in customer behavior, except as, for example, one of the benefits I've heard of AMI is the instantaneous notification for outages. Do you see quicker restorations where outages occur as something that could be used as a performance metric as a result of what you're learning from AMI? You talked about avoided truck rolls. Is that something you would view as an appropriate performance, as a possible performance mechanism that you've achieved a desired result?
I can start, and then my colleagues. I think that generally what I would say is we are supportive and not opposed to metrics, frankly, of any type, reporting them for transparency and for awareness. We think there's value. Our position, like Attorney Pace said in the PBR proceeding, is consistent here, which is that two things. When we're measuring and providing information on metrics, certainly for metrics that are going to have a financial incentive or penalty to the company, our criteria is generally that we think those metrics need to be for things that are within our control, they're objectively measurable, and there is a target or a baseline on which we can establish a target, so that we're actually having a financial penalty or incentive tied to an outcome that is achievable by us. It's within our control. So there's, within the PBR framework, there's different tiers of metrics. Some of them are just reporting only. And so to the extent there are metrics that we have the information is it's objectively verifiable, we can provide it. We're not opposed to providing it as long as it's, not administratively burdensome. But none of our pushback is to try to get out of reporting on information that we have. And it's also not to try to get out of being held accountable to delivering on exactly the types of thing, Commissioner Cheeseman, you just said. I don't know if that's the right metric. I'll let my other panelists chime in on that as to what the metrics would be. But there's a distinction, an important one, and I just want to make sure that we're being clear. Where we do push back and where we run into a roadblock is if those metrics, as it is outlined in the currently standing decision, are used to try to tie to our ability to recover the underlying costs. That's where we run into a major problem and challenge. We're not trying to get out of being held accountable for actually implementing the system well, but there needs to be an understanding that if we're making a decision to move forward and the system costs X, we need to have an ability, provided we've done everything right, we've made the decisions consistent with our AMI plan, we've all agreed it's the right thing to move forward, we've managed the costs and controlled them well, every dollar has been spent prudently. That is one thing, and that's a separate decision and discussion. Then there also being financial penalties or incentives tied to our ability to achieve certain metrics that are within our control, objectively measurable, and have a target. I think that is, I'm just trying to point out that our pushback comes when we try to bring those two concepts together, and Pura is under the prior order saying that we cannot get cost recovery if we don't achieve certain metrics or benefits. That's where things fall apart, because there's a difference between our ability to recover the costs if we've done everything well and prudently incurred them, and the fact that certain customer related benefits are not realized through no fault of our own. That should not have anything to do with cost recovery in that instance. In our view, it shouldn't have anything to do with a penalty either. But that's really the key distinction that I'm trying to make.
Thank you.
All right. I just have a few final questions. The next set, Mr. Lawrence, they're probably best directed toward you, but they're kind of open-ended. In terms of Massachusetts, I believe you testified earlier that your Eversource is at about a little under 10% deployment of AMI meters at the moment. What is just generally the customer engagement looked like for those customers that have now do have AMI meters for their service?
Thank you, Attorney Minikowski, for that question. So first of all, we are doing general awareness across our territory as we gradually transition to the new technology, just to make customers increasingly aware of what's being rolled out. Then there's a specific 90 day, 30-day, and then week of communication cadence to each customer, letting them know 90 days out, okay, you're about 90 days away. Now's the time to start thinking about the AMI usage. 30 days, we're getting customers prepared to receive that meter, and then the communication related to their imminent installation, that specifically lets them know what that experience is going to look like, including the fact that they'll have a temporary outage in most cases, unless they have a bypass. And then after they receive that meter, they receive a follow-up communication on how to start engaging with their data on the customer portal. Once a customer has had their meter for, I mentioned, and I don't know the exact timeline here, but after a certain amount of time, they will start to receive alerts. They'll be receive instructions on how to customize those alerts related to their AMI usage data. And then after roughly that 4-month time frame that they've built up the bill disaggregation history, they'll start to receive those reports through their channel of choice, through electronic channels, letting them know specifically what insights have been generated specific to their usage and what we're observing through their data.
Great. And recognizing again that the deployment is still relatively low right now. I mean, the customers that have reached that point, are they engaging on the customer portal with that data? Do you have any way to track that or know that?
Yes, but I do not have those stats, but we will absolutely include those stats in when we file our updated BCA and AMI plan in June.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, I know
Sorry. Attorney Minkowski, may I
Please.
just jump in quickly? What are the demographics of this current 10% in terms of socioeconomic groups, age? Because I'm thinking, I presume this assumes you have a smartphone to monitor this usage. I'm just curious as to, as I said, the demographics of the current rollout.
Yeah, so the demographics are, again, I don't have those broken out specifically for this conversation, but it's essentially 2/3 of our Western Massachusetts population. So, I would say, typical of a typical slice of our demographics for Western
Massachusetts, exactly.
Yes.
Not the greater Boston area.
Nope. We are starting the greater Boston area next week, actually. So,
okay. All right.
We
I
might
would
have
be
some early
curious,
information.
in keeping with Attorney Minkowski's questions, looking at that customer engagement and how it's occurring. Thank you. Apologies.
Thank you. Oh, no problem.
Mr. Horton, I mean, Commissioner Cheeseman's question was actually my next question, but Mr. Horton, I don't know if you wanted to add to that. I see your hand is up.
Thank you so much. I thank you for letting me jump back in. I just wanted to go back. One of my colleagues reminded me I had forgotten. We did file in November of 2021, an advanced metering infrastructure metrics and evaluation plan in which we laid out a series of implementation and deployment metrics, customer performance, operational performance, implementation. We laid out a series of metrics that we felt would be appropriate to track and monitor for both the success of our implementation and then through the course of AMI once installed, to get an understanding of how customers are using information, et cetera. So that's in November of 2021 in 17. Oh shoot, I just lost it. I think it's 17/12/03.
All right, thank you, Mr.
I
Horton.
got too many screens open. I'm so sorry.
My next question, Mr. Lawrence, is in the Massachusetts deployment so far. I know in some other jurisdictions where utilities have done broad AMI deployment, they've run into small but vocal groups of citizens that have opposed AMI due to privacy concerns or other concerns and have tried to opt out or not have the meter installed. Has Eversource encountered that issue in Massachusetts so far? And if so, how has the
yes.
company addressed it?
Yes, and I received that question before where I described we have our opt-out desk. So we have folks who are specifically trained to objectively walk through the customer's concerns, provide objective answers to their concerns, educate them on the features that they'll be missing out on. And if they continue to insist on opt-out, then we go ahead and migrate them to the opt-out population and let them know that they will incur that fee for the manual handling of their meter reading in the account. We have actually seen to date, we planned for 1% opt-out, and we're seeing about half that, roughly speaking. So less than 0.5% of our roughly 140,000 customers have gone through the opt-out.
Okay, that was going to be my next question, so you beat me to it. Thank you. My final question, and this was touched on in the presentation, but if there's anything else the witnesses would like to add. Obviously, there's a rate case coming up later this year that the company intends to file in Connecticut. So this proceeding versus that rate case, apart from obviously the temporal element that a decision here would allow the company to start deploying AMI sooner than a rate case decision, what other advantages does the company see to developing a cost recovery mechanism in this proceeding versus the rate proceeding?
I can start. I think there's some. I mean, I know that the rate case is going to take into account a number of different things, and so having clarity going into that rate case as to what the plan is with AMI, I think is beneficial. I think it's beneficial for all parties to have a good, clear understanding of, are we actually moving forward with AMI, or is it dependent on the outcome of yet another proceeding in this point in time, the rate case? So if we just played that through, and perhaps that's the biggest factor in my mind as to why it would be great to have this process moving forward on a parallel path, acknowledging that there has been a lot of work put in by all parties up until this point, would be that if we don't, and we're then, I think, having to deal with it in the rate case, we're then left with a decision that would come out at the end of the rate case in June of 2027, and then making a decision at that point in time, are we moving forward with the scenarios that Mr. Lawrence had laid out, restarting an RFP process, or trying to go back to the RFPs that have been previously relied upon, and then just initiating that time process. If we are able to move the PMO organization and just continue the process that's in place now running, and shift from Massachusetts into Connecticut without a delay or without a gap in the middle, that would be another reason and why we would want to have clarity as soon as we can. That will be the most efficient operation in our mind, as opposed to an alternative that would require us to restart the process and stand up the team at a later point in time. And so I think we realize there's a lot, but we also acknowledge that a lot has already happened. Again, this process started in 2019. From our perspective, we're down to 3 things that we need clarified or adjusted in the Pura order to be able to move forward. And then, of course, there is also the aspect of needing to update the costs and having everybody understand what those updated costs and benefits look like. And so we would prefer to get started sooner than the end of the rate case is really what it boils down to for us.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Horton. When I started at the OCC, one of the first dockets I was assigned was the AMI docket. And here we are, we're almost there. So I've seen it through. That concludes the cross of the Office of Consumer Counsel. I'd like to thank the panel and the commissioners for the opportunity today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
OCC. Deep.
Thank you very much. The questions that I had prepared have been answered, but I'm joined today by Eric Annis from BETP, and I believe he has some questions.
Good afternoon. Hope we'll get this quick. There should be a couple of just quick questions. I just want to get back and follow up on what Attorney Minkowski was saying. I want to confirm, if we take this out of the rate case and do it in this docket, that would mean that we consider the investments in the rate case. We would have no discussion or concern about the costs of AMI in the rate case coming up in June. Is that correct?
It was a little fuzzy for me. Mr. Ransom, I think was the question, if we dealt with this AMI on a separate track, would there really be no discussion of the investments as part of the rate case?
Correct. Yes, that is.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I also think, though, in a rate case, what at least what I was envisioning, if we didn't have this process happening right now that we're here participating in today, I do think we would be talking about AMI in the rate case. But when I say that, I don't think that we would be expecting to be, presenting forward-looking forecasts of projected plan additions and asking PURA to approve them multi-years out into the future. Like the discussion in the rate case would be around trying to get to a regulatory framework that would allow us to move forward with AMI, as an investment, with cost recovery still being dealt with outside of a rate case. At least that's how I would expect things to play out in the absence of PURA taking action outside the rate case.
Okay. And then another question is when Eversource makes its capital investment plans, is a limiting factor exclusively what capital Eversource can raise, or does Eversource have other considerations such as the ability of the customers to pay? So there's lots of needs on the system, but we can only invest in so much, and so we'll prioritize. So it's part of the limiting factor is the rate impact of the investment. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's a number of things. It's Eversource's financial standing, and having an understanding of how much dollars we're collecting and how much level of investment does that support. It's what does the system need, and we're charged to serve our customers safely and reliably. So we need to do that and make the necessary investments in order to do that. And then, of course, there's affordability at the front and center of all of our minds. So it's all of the above, for sure.
Okay. And I guess it's my final question, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you had said earlier, Mr. Horton, on the need for the cooperative regulatory environment or commission. I couldn't remember the exact language you used. And I think you've touched on it a couple of times. I just want a quick synopsis of why that is necessary for this investment as opposed to other investments. And I think Ms. Coleman got to that as well, but I just want a good crisp answer on why we need this special carve out for this investment as opposed to other very large investments that occur. And please make sure I got the language right on cooperative regulatory commission or environment. I couldn't remember what you said and why that's unique to this.
Yeah, I think it's the magnitude of the investment. Our position from the beginning, dating back to 2019, and in fact, it was the same in Massachusetts, was that implementing AMI on a 5-year schedule, it comes at a significant expenditure of both capital and upfront O&M that we want to make sure and need to make sure that we have a supportive regulatory environment in order to do that. We feel that it is a magnitude, a type of investment that is very different from other run-of-the-mill investments that we make. In the absence of having alignment with our regulator and with other key stakeholders to move forward on that timeline, we wouldn't move forward on that timeline. We would do something else. That's, I think, the most succinct way that I can say it. We would either continue to try to limp along with the existing meters. We are taking them from Massachusetts, refurbishing them in hopes of being able to redeploy them in Connecticut. We would deploy AMI on a slower, more phased time frame so that it doesn't have that full upfront cost. It also would not yield the full upfront benefits. And so that is simply it. We can't make an investment of this magnitude. It is not a routine run-of-the-mill investment. $1 billion or more, to throw out a number, is something that we want to make sure that we have full clarity and support from our regulator. And I think just the fact that it's taken 7 years shows that it's not a run-of-the-mill investment. If it was, we would have moved forward with it on our own, or we wouldn't have had to have all this process. It is a unique animal and warranting a separate discussion for sure.
Okay, I just want to make sure I would think of that. And this is probably my last question, so that statement. It's because of the magnitude, we need to change the risk profile around it, is how I hear that.
Well, change the risk profile. I didn't quite say that. I think it's just that it's the magnitude and the discretion over how and when it's deployed. It's like I've said, there is not we are not moving forward with AMI because it's going to reduce the local delivery portion of a customer's bill. It's not. It's going to add to that. And so we're at a point in time where everybody is extremely sensitive to adding costs on a customer's bill. Even today, we all certainly are. Under the prior commission, the commission was prioritizing reducing rates over a number of other things. So it was very risky for a utility to move forward with an investment of this magnitude without having an understanding and clarity of all parties that that decision for us to move forward with AMI on the timeline that we think is most beneficial is going to add cost to customers' bills. We're not going to do that unless we have the alignment of our regulator and the support of our regulator to acknowledge that it is going to increase the local delivery portion of a customer's bill, but that there are benefits that are going to be realized for customers that make it worthwhile. That is, again, I think the most succinct way that I can say it. The only change in the risk profile, as I see it, is just that we have both the regulatory support in the form of an order that supports us moving forward with the policy decision on the AMI implementation timeframe that we have proposed, and we have a companion cost recovery mechanism that allows us to move forward on that same timeframe. And if we don't have those two things, then again, something else needs to happen. We deploy AMI much more slowly. We continue to deploy AMR, or something else happens. And so that's why AMI is different. It's a unique investment, a significant undertaking in cost for our customers.
I have a quick follow-up with more of a statement than anything else. I want to defer to Commissioner Beecher before I press your hand. I have a very small question afterwards. Go ahead, Commissioner.
You sure? Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I mean, so it's really by definition a risk mitigation strategy. I mean, you pretty much said that. I mean, that it's, you know, that it's this large investment and you'd like to have some level of certainty to make that investment. So I think, I mean, I don't see how trackers don't reduce revenue risk. I think that's really what they do, whether it's a operating cost or capital costs, and maybe even more so in a capital cost as far as risk reduction. But you've said several times, you know, benefits to customers, and I do appreciate that, but again, but as we've also heard, like a lot of those are qualitative, right? And some of them are contingent. What's the benefit to and you talk about the value proposition, which, you know, to me is very general sort of business world framing. But in our world, what's the benefit to the cost of service? What's the benefit to the quality and the cost of service that, you know, as we're all together stewards of the ratepayers' wallet here? What's the, you know, how does this lower the cost of service and or enhance service to ratepayers, the people who are we're asking to pay for this?
I can. Go ahead, Doug.
You go ahead, Joe.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So I think first of all, a number of the things that we're talking about here in terms of giving customers more control over their data, accessing technologies to decarbonize, shift to time varying rates, those do accrue to customers on their bill, but it would be more so on the supply side rather than the distribution rate side. And that's difficult to quantify simply because of the adoption question, as well as the future design of rates, it would be dependent not only on rate proceedings that we would involve in, but also what suppliers are willing to bring to the table as well. There are operational savings in the form of more efficient outage restoration, all of those reduced truck rolls that I talked about. So those are offsets to the overall cost to customers. I just have to defer to my colleague here, who is the rates expert, as to exactly how what's the net impact on a customer's bill.
Well, I think, as I've said, I think there are benefits. There's qualitative benefits as well, as you said, and there are benefits that would accrue within the distribution portion of a customer's bill. It's just that the costs associated with AMI are greater than the benefits that would accrue to that portion of a customer's bill, right? So the value proposition to a customer is going to need to take into account a number of other things, not just impacts on the distribution portion of a bill, but to the extent they can save on the supply portion of their bill, or in the future allow us to avoid and defer capital expenditures, which will be a benefit to them, but it's not one that's going to result in a lower rate today. In deploying AMI in the schedule that we would like to, would allow for all customers to receive those benefits and have those enhanced capabilities today and at once, as opposed to if we don't have the ability to move forward on that time frame, it would have the haves and the have-nots, a situation that Mr. Lawrence said we're trying to avoid in Massachusetts, where just by definition, the metering capabilities of certain customers that in a phased deployment have AMI would be greater and more enhanced than customers who are going to get AMI at some future far off point. And so that's another reason for us to support the notion of moving forward with AMI on an accelerated schedule, as it allows us to give all customers those benefits, because we can't have a scenario just in the normal course of rate making where we have like individualized rates where only certain customers who have an AMI meter are paying for that. The costs are spread across all of our customer base. And so we think that the benefit should be able to be realized by all customers too. Just think about today, customers we don't know if a customer has lost power with our existing metering infrastructure unless a customer calls us. With AMI, we will have much more real-time information to be able to know that before our customers even do in some circumstances and situations. So there are a lot of benefits that might not reduce the value, or excuse me, reduce the cost of service directly, but will provide real benefits and tangible benefits to our customers, frankly, to meet their expectations just in terms of other aspects of their lives. I don't think they understand or appreciate just how little we know about their usage in real time at a customer meter level, whereas with AMI, we will.
Yeah. The challenge is, I think, for those of us in this space is that, you kind of almost hinted at the issue of sort of a price discrimination problem, right? And you also in some ways have a benefit discrimination problem, or it's not elegant wording, but one of the challenges of qualitative benefits is that they are probably unevenly distributed. Yet we're asking for all customers, to support that major investment. So that's more of a comment. And just as another aside, not to over personalize this, but about a year ago, State Farm sent me a device that plugs into my house and monitors voltage and alerts me to outage issues, and is connected to the Wi-Fi. So there are technologies that I would suggest provide some of this functionality. This is an insurance company wants to know if I'm going to burn my house down. I realize these are not perfect substitutes. I'm not saying that, but I think we're in a world where technology is moving very, very quickly, and there's more and more devices in the home can actually communicate directly with you about when and how they're being used. So I feel like we have to keep an open mind as we think about, again, making the best investments and being cognizant of who's paying for them. So I apologize, Eric. I'll let you continue.
That's great, actually, because I was very close to where I was heading. I just want to confirm this is a pretty quick question. So I guess some of the benefits would be in a counterfactual, like the costs are lower than they would have been. So when you guys are submitting your benefit cost ratio thing in a couple of months, whatever that you guys said, will you include, like, will the bill be less than it otherwise would have been, right? So I understand that you're going to have it's going to look like a rate increase today because in the line item is AMI, but it would have been a rate increase because of the substation and wire and whatever else. So is that when you guys submit that, I guess it's more of an information request, will you show that it will be against the counterfactual? If we were to do AMI, your bill will be lower than it otherwise would have been? Or are you saying, Mr. Horton, that no, even those benefits, which we can't get very good detail on, that isn't necessarily what we're looking at for the value proposition, that it's just qualitative stuff? And you can answer that now if you can, or just have that clearly in your submission on the benefit cost ratio, because I think that's a key piece on this decision on whether to move forward, whether it's prudent to move forward. and whether we should move forward quickly or not. I think these are all pieces of that information that we need, along with the other qualitative stuff that you had mentioned on equity and all the other. So I guess I'll end it there, and you can answer it if you choose to, or we can see it later. And I'm not sure how that will fit into the briefing schedule, which is due very quickly, if we're not going to see that before then.
I think Mr. Lawrence can clarify, but the BCA does take into account the benefit of an avoided investment. And so I think that would cover what you were saying.
Yeah, the BCA it looks at changes in cash flows and then calculates the present value of the changes in cash flows that benefit customers and the changes in cash flows that don't benefit customers. So the BCA ratio is by definition a net present value assessment of those costs and benefits, which I think, Mr. Ennis, to your question, is an approximation of that but-for analysis. So it will include avoided costs, but I do not believe that we have the precision to forecast out the entire distribution rate under both scenarios and show how they differ, which is, I think, the other crux of your question, but I don't want to assume that I understand it if I didn't.
Yeah, that was getting at it. I just want to make sure that the BCA will say the actual ratepayer dollars we expect to be less than they would otherwise, and if these other benefits, or at least break it down to no, you need to stack the non-ratepayer benefits to make it over one. We're not. As long as we can break that down in that visual, that's enough. To the best of your ability, understanding that.
Yeah, that level of detail will be included.
We don't know. Okay. Thank you. And that's all for me, and I assume Deep as well. Unless Susie has more questions.
Okay. Any more from Deep?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thanks. Authority staff, I see you reserve the right. Any questions? Okay, I don't think authority staff.
Sorry, staff has no questions.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Okay, redirect, Attorney Pace. Attorney Goodman?
Hi, Commissioner Arconti. First, I apologize that Attorney Trincy had to leave for another meeting, and I'm kind of substituting for her. I realize I don't believe we reserved time, but if there'd be an opportunity to ask a few questions, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. What are you thinking in terms of time here?
I will try to be brief. I have a number of questions, but I'll be selective, and I'll try to go through quickly. And of course, I understand if I'm using too much time, I'll wrap it up.
Go for it.
Thank you. I'll try to do a bit of a lightning round for what I think might be the faster questions, Mr. Horton and Lawrence. You mentioned that you'll be providing an updated BCA and implementation plan. I don't recall you saying approximately how long it might take to complete and file that information.
The plan is to file that on June 1 with the with the CLMP rate case. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And when we're talking about cost recovery approved in rate case and recovery risk, would you agree that the recovery risk is really tied to, as you were saying, the regulatory support and approval of a recovery mechanism, regardless of whether the mechanism is a tracker or base rates?
Could you restate that? I'm sorry.
Sure. In other words, I understand, I believe the company's preference is for a tracker, but if through a rate case, the authority were to approve a capital investment plan that includes spending for AMI, wouldn't that also give you some assurance that you can move forward with the investment and have the assurance of recovery that you're looking for?
I think so. I think if I track, there were some other questions earlier. I think it was from Commissioner Beecher that hinted at that there's other ways to skin the cat, and there are. I mean, there's at the end of the day, there's many different ways that a regulator can provide for cost recovery of an investment outside of a tracker. So if your question is if PURA would authorize a multi-year rate plan, for instance, in the rate case that provided recovery of the capital and O&M of AMI, but just did it through base rates instead of through a tracker, that certainly would would work as well. It's just that in light of the recent rate case outcomes and the departure of multi-year rate plans, or the departure from the use of multi-year rate plans, that doesn't seem like that's likely in my estimation. So, but the bottom line from our perspective is, again, it's a large investment, so we want to make sure that we have support of our regulator in the state before we move forward in the timeline that we want, number one. And then number two, we need to have the appropriate recovery so that we are able to finance the investment.
Thanks. And these meters would only monitor electric service. Separate meter would be required for gas. Is that correct? Separate AMI meter for gas. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Correct.
Okay. And did Eversource look at other distribution utilities in New York that have implemented AMI? For example, Con Edison installed and rolled out an AMI business plan that installed more than 5 million electric and gas meters, which were recovered through rates, again, approved as part of a capital investment plan with base rate recovery. Did you look at that or any other New York utilities as another model when you were developing the proposal?
I don't recall specifically, Mr. Goodman, which we looked at. I'm not as familiar with their investment plan.
Okay. And I don't recall from the proposal, and apologies if it was discussed earlier and I didn't hear, but whether, I guess, regardless of what the precise recovery mechanism is the company proposing to be subject to any cost cap? For example, if you estimate that full deployment of AMI will cost X amount, pick a number just for discussion purposes, will you be bound to that? Or like if it were a tracker, for example, that was set up to recover that X amount, would you potentially spend above that amount and then seek recovery of the incremental? In other words, going to the concern of this is a large investment, there could be some overspending, would want some guardrails on it. What are you proposing to address that customer concern?
Yes, it's absolutely valid. In Massachusetts, I can say the department in Massachusetts, and we're moving forward to this plan, implemented a cap set at the level of our expected investment in that proceeding. And it's just what you said, the second thing you said, which is that the tracker is capped at the amount that was forecast. It does not cap, and I think this is one of our points for clarification and reconsideration in this proceeding as well, is that it's not a hard cap that if any dollar is spent above that amount, that it's automatically deemed imprudent and not recoverable. It's just that it's not allowed for recoverable through the preferential rate making framework. It's subject to a separate and later prudency review and recovery elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. When we're on slide 5, where you showed the process, is there any manipulation of the raw meter data that is necessary when it comes in? Like, for example, would the company need additional FTEs to manage or work with the data in some way?
Excellent question. Thank you, Attorney Goodman. Yes, so the meter data management system performs most of the VEE process automatically, but it will occasionally kick out exceptions, which are then worked by a staff. What my experience from previous deployments is that over time, it's a roughly 1-to-1 migration of the employees who were previously working AMR exceptions. By the time you get to the end of the AMI deployment, you have roughly the same number, just primarily shifted to working those exceptions that are kicked out of the MDMS system. So the back office, from a data validation perspective, impacts are not that significant.
Would there be any other staffing impacts you'd expect, or is it focused just on that?
Oh yeah, there are significant staffing impacts, both positive and negative, which will be laid out in the full BCA. Okay. I think that the two notable drivers is that there's obviously a significant decline in meter reading personnel and expense, but there is an increase in AMI operations, which didn't exist, essentially personnel to manage the network.
Okay. And I think two quick questions, and hopefully this will be quick. And I appreciate the accommodation, commissioners. first, Mr. Lawrence O'Hearn, are there any components within the meter that have to be replaced in advance of the 15-year life cycle?
I don't believe so. No.
Thanks.
I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Okay. And I'm curious, do you know whether your commercial and industrial customers already have and use AMI meters?
The short answer to that question is that there is an interval data technology for large commercial industrial customers, which has been in place for some time. It uses really high-end meters and kind of dedicated communications networks, and are typically out of scope for a first AMI deployment. And then we would kind of determine over time when those meters start to approach retirement as to whether they would be migrated to the AMI system or not. But it's because those meters are so large, expensive, and specialized, it's not they're typically not in scope. Those largest meters are typically not in scope for the first deployment.
Okay, thank you. I'll stop there, Commissioner Conti. Again, thank you for granting me some time to ask questions.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Goodman. Attorney Pace needs some time to consider redirect.
Just very briefly, I'm mindful of the late time of the day, and I appreciate the commissioner's patience. If I could just have 2 minutes to allow my clients to put themselves on mute and turn off their cameras, and I will communicate with them if we have any questions for redirect. I'll be very.
Let's reconvene let's do 5 minutes, reconvene at 4:15.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. All right. Is everybody ready?
Yes.
Okay, back to you.
So Vice Chairman, I have some good news, which is we do not have any redirect examination for the panel.
Oh, okay. And then I will move on to next steps. So next steps, briefs are due Friday, March 6th by 4 p.m. But the authority will update the schedule to reflect a proposed final decision issuance date, a due date for written exceptions and requests for oral argument, an oral argument date, and a final decisions issuance date. Are there any closing administrative matters before we adjourn?
Vice Chairman, I have 3 late file exhibits, 11, 12, and 13, which are due on the 23rd at 4 p.m. So we're all set on that issue. Thank you.
Great. Anything else? All right. Thanks everyone for their participation.